Welcome to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid. A set of conversations about our government, our politics, and the kind of country we aspire to be. And now, here's your host, Edwin Eisendrath, on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
Hello, everybody. I am in Michigan today talking with folks about how we can come together after a hard-fought primary. And that means that this show that you're listening to is pre-recorded. So when I tell you it's a good one, well, it's not really prognostication. I think you're going to like it. We will, of course, take your calls at the usual hour. Paul will lead that conversation in my absence. So enjoy the show. Now, a couple of weeks ago, the National Republican Campaign Committee sent around a memo. It urged GOP members and their candidates to, here's a quote, use your time in the district as an opportunity to sell our wins, especially those in the one big beautiful bill. And a couple of sentences later, it tells members to argue that, again, a quote, the Trump administration is holding elites accountable and ending Biden-era tax breaks for the rich. Okay, I mean, when you stop laughing, right? But you know what it never suggests? It never suggests that members use their time to listen to their constituents. Now, you probably haven't heard about that memo, but the noise you can't turn off is the sound of lies. And this week, it is the sound of the supposed socialists' takeover of the Democratic Party, which is as dishonest as the GOP memo, but maybe more dangerous. And so let's talk about this primary season a little bit. What did James Tallarico, Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez, and Abdul El-Sayed have in common? None of them is a socialist. They aren't radicals. Taken together, they represent the broad spectrum of viewpoints that fall within the ambit of a left-of-center political party. Most importantly, they each embody the values and concerns of the people in their communities, and all of them are winners in this primary season. You know, they're dedicated, they're determined to renew our democracy, to make our government work for us, and to combat the obscene corruption we see everywhere we look. These aren't radical ideas. Fighting for them is only radical in the sense the Declaration of Independence is radical. But you're going to hear that charge every day, every day. But let me be clear. The era of left-wing radicals is not upon us. Rather, the era of right-wing radicals, the era of corruption and cruelty, the era of big oil and big money and big lies is drawing to a close. And they're in a panic about it. And one reason I can say it's drawing to a close is that Democrats did their job this primary cycle. The nominees we picked in state after state ran tough campaigns. They are tested. They know how to organize, how to campaign, how to turn out votes. And the candidates who came in second, they're nearly all on board to help in the upcoming general. This primary season didn't just produce talented candidates. It generated excitement and hope, the things autocrats most fear. And Donald Trump and his enormous wads of political cash aim to turn our hope into fear. He calls us all communists. He says Democrats have been taken over by radicals. And, you know, this week, Judd Legum reported that Senate Republicans have launched a new pink slime operation, opening so-called newsrooms in swing states to whitewash their campaign lies and pretend it's journalism. These propaganda outlets are part of, the Trump-led operation that has a huge advantage over Democrats in funding and in data. After all, Doge was in part about creating pathways to data that could be weaponized. So the GOP propaganda, it won't just lie about the so-called accomplishments of a disastrous administration. It won't just lie about specific Democratic candidates. It will also toil mightily at finding pain points in our coalition. Republican propaganda will, for instance, target Israel's strongest supporters, saying Democrats want to abandon that nation. And it will target Muslim voters to say that Democrats sold them out during the Gaza war. Never mind that taking the most extreme position on a terribly complicated question is unhelpful. But taking both extreme positions at the same time, well, that's Trump's campaign operation. And it's designed to replace our hope with fear. It's designed to make us distrust each other. But this campaign is different than his previous ones. This time, Trump is talking to an America that doesn't believe him. Americans have decided by majorities far bigger than can explain by party alliance that his radical right-wing Christian nationalist administration is the most corrupt, least competent, most dangerous in American history. This is no time to second guess the voters in our primaries. On the contrary, in state after state, our voters have done their best, and the result is nothing short of a miracle. We have the strongest slate of candidates running in the most elections, from Senate to school boards, all across this country. And where there was a mistake in Graham-Plattner in Maine, we came together to correct it. I am in awe of what Democrats have accomplished this primary season. Now, of course, you will find Democratic candidates with whom on some issues, even some important ones, you disagree. You will also find Democrats with whom on those very same issues you do agree. That's what happens in a big tent. If we work hard and get most of them elected, then they will work together and we will work with them to find policies that we all agree on. That's what a democracy is. That's what a democracy is. You will not see anything like that in Trump's party, certainly not on character. I mean, after all, Trump delights in endorsing people like Ken Paxton, whose character and fitness for office should instead disqualify them, and certainly not in ideas about our future. Their policies are a disaster. And you may hear them whisper, these candidates, that there's space between them and their boss, but the whispers are just air. Senator Susan Collins told us we could trust her to protect abortion rights. Then she cast the deciding vote to put Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court and end Roe v. Wade. The rest vote lockstep with Donald Trump on the big ugly bill, on Todd Blanche, on Pete Hegseth, on everything. And that brings me back to that GOP memo to members of Congress. In the GOP, we now know members of Congress take their orders from one man. They are his representatives, not ours. So when they go to America's communities, they don't go to listen, they go to sell. And if you doubt me, just look at one of their town halls. Every single day between now until after the new Congress is seated and sworn in, Republicans will do everything to get us to turn on each other so that we won't notice they stopped working for us a long time ago. We'll talk about that and more in this show today. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody, I have a treat for you. Ahmed Baba is back. He is, of course, a journalist and a political analyst. He, I want to say publishes, but it just doesn't sound right. He writes, he does podcasts, he does all kinds of news through all kinds of media, all of which you can find at Ahmed Baba News on Substack.
Thank you. Appreciate the shout out of the URL as always, man. Thanks for having me here. It's always great talking to you. Every time we have a great back and forth.
Yeah, I learn a lot. And look, we have some time, and I want to do this. There's just so much to talk about, and I think we have to start. I mean, I want to talk about Michigan, but I don't want to start with Michigan. I want to start where like the news has started for 10 years, and that's with Donald Trump, right?
Mm-hmm.
Has the country, you think, made up their mind finally about him? Do you think we've turned a corner where, he's just a tired old man who doesn't know how to do his job, and people are beginning to figure that out? I mean, I know he's got a hard core there somewhere, but it seems like, I mean, let's just start with one that I know you've talked about. Do you think the country knows how corrupt he is?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think the grift is so apparent. I just did a video on this. It's in everyone's faces now, finally. I mean, we're seeing that the con is combusting. I think we've seen in the polling last week, he had his worst ever week of polling I think I've ever seen, with CNN having him at 34%, matching an all-time low, Quinnipiac having him at 32%, I believe. It was an all-time low. We had another poll from The Economist. YouGov had him at around the same amount. So he's he is really polling terribly, and not to mention his polling on the economy is down in the gutter, even lower than his overall approval. So the American people are seeing it clearly. Like, you can't unilaterally raise prices while you're enriching yourself to the tune of 2.24 billion last year,
Right.
1.44 billion in crypto, profiting directly from industries that you directly oversee. And the American people see like right through it. I mean, we could tick through all of the grift, but they're really seeing right through it.
They are. I mean, that brings up a couple of interesting points because you and I are doing this in part because the media channels that used to be here seem to be broken,
Mhm.
right? And yet Americans, I mean, I think belatedly, but Americans are able, despite all the propaganda, despite the captured news, they're able to see what's happening, and that's still amazing to me.
Yeah, I mean, especially how fractured we are. Like, we all have our own algorithmic realities
Yep.
where we're not all consuming the same 15-minute big three, network news.
Mhm.
And yet people, the reason why is because his corruption and his incompetence broke through to
Everything.
Americans' everyday lives. Everything. Like, now you see him make a belligerent, reckless move in the Middle East, and you don't need to check the headlines to
No.
know something happened in Iran. Literally the other day, like, I had a newborn son, so like there was like a week or a
Wait
month.
1 second. Congratulations.
Thank you,
That's the
brother.
best.
It's beautiful, and I had took a little bit of time where I was kind of like,
Yeah.
relaxing for the first little month and kind of just bonding with him. And I hadn't checked the news that morning, and I go to the gas pump and I see gas hit $4. I knew right there something happened in the Strait of Hormuz. Something happened with Iran. The ceasefire combusted, and I think Americans can see that too, where they don't need to be tuned in and be a news junkie to know that Trump is incompetent and negatively impacting their lives.
Yeah. So is polling as bad as Nixon was in his last moments? Um, People know he's a grifter. They know he's not doing that the job he's doing isn't making our lives better. So what's in it for Senate Republicans to wrap their arms around him and continue to do crazy things like, say, corrupt Todd Blanche should continue to weaponize the Justice Department? Like, do they all want to go down in flames?
I mean, that's what has been so confounding. There's no more electoral really reasoning for them to back who's becoming the W. Bush level approval ratings. You might see some polls where he's in his 20s in approvals here in a little bit. And that what used to be pariah status. You used to want to try to back away
Yeah.
from that president. So for them to still enable him in this way, especially Todd Blanche, when he could just stay and there's not that much repercussions. He could just stay acting. Like, what are we doing here? And I think a lot of it is, honestly, I'm starting to think it's the grift. I'm starting to think that they know that their career after the Senate, like Tillis, for example, who's not running for reelection, it still needs to make some money within the Republican sphere, right? Like, they still want to make money in the industry, and I think they see the way that the money is just flowing to Donald right now. I think that it's all self-interest, like, because there's no logical reason for those who aren't running for reelection
I
to
guess
back
that's
Blanche.
just so sad. I mean,
Yeah,
you teach young people about democracy, and they don't say it out loud, but I can see it in their faces. They're saying like, why would I go to bat for democracy? What is like this form of government doing for me?
yeah,
And I've worked in other parts of the world that aren't democracies, and sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes they have a government that wants to make people's lives better. Um, I mean, we have some work to do to remind people that the reason our democracy isn't making people's lives better right now is that these guys have managed to capture part of democracy, and it's not actually working for the voters. It's working for the
yes,
money. It's working for the map makers. We have to get it
yes.
back. And then when it works for voters, it actually does deliver.
Yes, and that is the thing, is telling the story in a concrete way and tying the grift and the corruption, the self-interest
Yeah.
to the fact that it's not helping the everyday American, and also telling the story, the full story, trickle down economics, that we're in the culmination of, the failed Reagan policies. We're still living, we just had the largest legislative wealth transfer in history with the big, beautiful bill. Like, there's all of these bills and moves that entrench the K-shaped economy. And right now, Trump is the personification of the K-shaped economy, and they deliberately are making democracy work for them and not for the everyday American. And that's the message. And that's where we see some of these, I know we're going to get to Michigan soon, but that's why some of these progressives are doing such a good job.
Yeah. I mean, like, who's for mass deportations anymore? Right? Maybe some people, but not most people. Most people after Chicago and Minneapolis, they're like, this is just cruel. This isn't
Yeah.
what we signed up for. And who's for like ending our government's commitment to civil rights and voting rights? I mean, maybe some Republicans who are in office, but not most Americans. And cutting Medicare, like that's just politically stupid, I think.
Yeah, it should be, right?
Right? And or big tax giveaways to the wealthiest. I just don't see who the constituency is for ending corporate oversight and regulation these days.
I
I
think
could go on this list of things that go off or ending environmental protection. You know, the poly market. This is one I just learned. You can bet on whether there's going to be a wildfire. And so Democratic senators have written a letter trying to get the CFTC to stop it because they say you're just encouraging arson in this incredible year of fires. And the administration, let's just bet.
that's like betting on that's insane. It's betting on climate change. It's betting on that's betting on crises, and then Trump's actively trying to prevent regulation of this gambling. It's a dystopia that we're seeing here, and there's no constituency for it. And there needs to be, like, that's why the next Democrat has to tell that story and make the case for a more ethical regulatory system that doesn't allow for this to run rampant. Because, like we talked about, I believe one of our last conversations about how this is just like Trump's not just a symptom; he's a culmination of everything we've seen. And with the, like, I think that lie that made these policies palatable to working class voters and voters that used to traditionally be Republican or were Democrat at different times as we fought over the different demographics. But, like, there was a lie that immigrants and brown people and welfare queens are responsible for their cheating the system. That's why you're not getting ahead. Well, they just gave tax cuts to the rich, and people see right through that right now.
I think they do. I mean, and now they're going after Head Start. Like Head Start's like one of the most successful programs we've ever had.
Yeah, it is unbelievable to me. And then all the programs they've gone after, USAID, like it is a destructive dismantling of the federal government. And Americans now, like, that's why Democrats have to make a case that government is actually here to help you. And we're, again, I often say I think we're still living in the Reagan era, not the Trump era.
Yeah.
Like, we were still living in with those tropes, like the government's not here to help you, like all of those things. And it's like, I think people are starting to recognize that the role of government should be to solve these issues.
Lives. Yeah. I mean, right. All of the worst pieces of our government for the last 40 years have managed to find them to be put together at the same time right now. It's the worst of the worst. All right, but people now know this. So the question is, like, since we know it, we ought to be able to throw them out. They don't want us to throw them out. They're going to cheat. They've already started to cheat. So we have to win an election that isn't free and isn't fair, like the Hungarians did.
Yep. And make it too big to rig.
Yep.
Like the Hungarians did.
Yep. All right. So we're starting this process. And, we do this is, of course, first we got to pick our candidates. Right. And that's what we have primaries for. And I want to talk to you about Michigan, but I want to talk about it this way. I want to help us understand. For the last 6 months or a year, you see all these stories. The Democrats are in disarray. The Democrats are idiots. The Democrat, right? Like we don't like the Democrats. And I think most of those stories they're talking about, like the DNC, this small thing at the top, right? Which had about zero to do with the results in any primaries we've had across the country, because the Democrats aren't the DNC. They're just plain old people who are out there, right? Okay, so talk about Michigan.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing is the kind of dismantling of party structure. Like, there's not a Democrat, like it's wild that the Democratic Party can have such a low popularity, but then be up in the generic ballot, right? Because people, when they're asked about Democrats, are thinking about their candidate that they like, right? They're thinking that's what's happening now. You might be thinking Zohar Mamdani, you might be thinking Abdullah Said, you might be thinking AOC when you're asked about whether you'd vote for a Republican or a Democrat on the ballot. And so you don't think Ken Martin when you're asked, like, what do you think of the Democratic Party versus Republicans? And I think in Michigan, what we saw was the Democratic establishment have a wake-up call where we had one candidate who was going against corporate money and running, and his literally slogan, Abdullah Syed's, was money out of politics, money in your pocket. And then we had Haley Stevens who really misread the moment and didn't see how toxic it would have been to accept that amount of money and not even like kind of walk a line on Israel to say we acknowledge that Netanyahu, like she could have just went towards Netanyahu. And I think it's also so there's a couple of things. There's a corporate money aspect in Michigan. There's the populist message in Michigan, the affordability side, and then there's this new kind of Israel litmus test we're seeing brewing in the Democratic Party.
I think there is a lot of healing to be done in the Democratic Party in Michigan. And let me ask you about this, because you looked at the vote totals, and Haley Stevens won biggest in the blackest parts of Detroit, right? So, and it's not lost on Black voters in Michigan that a lot of Abdullah Syed's base was not helpful to Kamala Harris.
That's a really good point.
And they're like, okay, I get it. You didn't help us, but you want us to help you. So what does he have to do look, Democrats do not win by taking Black voters for granted. They do not win unless they represent the interests of Black Americans and do it legitimately. What does he have to do to convince voters in Detroit that he is their candidate now?
This is the question, and the one I posed right after I'm looking at the vote totals, because it's Black voters that he underperformed with.
Yep.
I've said that and I got a lot of heat for it, even though it's true. And it's also working class voters. Like, why was it that white, highly educated vote? Yeah, why is it that white, highly educated people are the ones that always gravitate towards progressives, right? I mean, that's what we see in race after race. And as someone who wants to see progressive policies pass in the world, in America, we have to ask ourselves these hard questions. I mean, it's just what the data says, and you can't ignore it. And so there has to be a question is, number one, why are Black voters skeptical of some of these progressives? I think I have an answer for that. And then there's the harder question, which is, why is it that working class voters in race after race, in primary after primary, I mean, in the general, it's a different story a lot of the time, but in the primaries, why is it that working class voters tend to go not for the progressive when the whole message is about working class vote, that literally should be tailored to them. So those are the main questions that Al Sayed has to ask himself and the other members of the progressive side of the caucus. And with Black voters, I think it's just because they're more moderate. Historically, we've seen, I mean, look at Biden in South Carolina, look at, the choices they make, they're pragmatic. They are thinking, they're big picture, especially older Black voters. How do we beat the Republican? How do we re-entrench Black power? How do we, what can we do to get the John Lewis Voting Rights Act? What can we do to push Black interests? So they need to be convinced in the electability argument, I think. There's that, because that was one of the reasons why Obama didn't do, in the early days, some Black voters were skeptical Obama would win until he won Iowa. Then it was like, oh, he can win white people, so now he's electable. Right. And then with the working class voters, I don't know why some of them maybe aren't hearing the message. Maybe it's the ad spend. But why did they go towards Haley Stevens when the entire message of Al Sayed was about working class? So those are like real hard questions.
I mean, in the primary, they were both pitching kind of a working class message. It didn't work for Haley Stevens because she was pitching the message, but she took all the money. So right, but the messages were all working class, because I mean they're both Democrats.
Of course, yeah,
right.
Exactly.
So a little more understandable. But I think the hard feelings in Detroit. I want to win this. I want to win this seat. I want him to be the next senator from Michigan. But I think he's got to spend time in Detroit and
yes.
and real listening and. I mean, this is a community that hurts, and needs a lot of help. I mean, a lot of them.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, black voters specifically, I think there's a lot of anger at the uncommitted movement.
In Michigan for
In
sure.
Michigan, especially Dearborn, and I think that definitely could be playing a role. I also think Haley Stevens really touted her previous affiliations with Obama, and like made it a point to talk to black voters. That's one of the critiques that I have of some of the, like, especially Bernie's earlier messaging and some of the progressive messaging where they don't really center black people.
Look, you can love Bernie, but Vermont is like the third
of
whitest
course,
state in the country.
and
It helps to actually spend. I mean, I live in a great diverse city. It helps to spend time with people to understand people, which is why I think the man's got to go to Detroit.
Yeah, he's got to go to Detroit. He's got to hear them out. He's got to hear what is driving their vote, and then tailor some of that messaging into it, because clearly just the class focus, with the absence of race inequality, isn't landing. And I think he could also take some notes from Ossoff as well, who in Georgia, does black people love them some Ossoff? I gotta say, all right, like black people love them some Ossoff, and he, every time he gets a chance, he talks about, like, when he was asked about the Trump talking about the 2020 election, he centered that around Trump trying to disenfranchise black voters.
Yes,
and that's, people try to act like that's from the woke one era and we shouldn't be talking about racial inequality anymore, but Ossoff does it and it works for him in a mostly reddish state, right? So I think there's.
Can I just say about Georgia for 1 second? And I don't mean, I love my senators in Illinois, but the two senators in Georgia make the greatest team. Those two, they are just fabulous. I mean,
they're incredible.
Reverend Warnock is like, every time the right wing says, like, we're going to tell you what it means to be Christian, and he gets up there and he it's just the best.
Yeah, it's great. He goes off, and him and Tallarico are doing something really interesting on the religion front, pushing back on Christian nationalism. It's wonderful. But yeah, in Georgia, him and Ossoff make a great team. And Ossoff, I gotta say, like, just candidly, he's one of my top picks for 2028 of one of the people who are most viable. But a Jewish senator for who can win independents and voters that lean right, and black people love him. Sounds to me like someone who could win the primary, right? So I think that's what I'll say. I think he's going to work on that. Is try to, like, figure out a way to walk that line that can make a message more appealing to the Dem base itself, which is black people, and then really try to also bridge with Haley Stevens voters and Jewish voters as well, because
let's go to the Israel message for a second. There's a civil war in the Jewish community. There are people, for whom the state of Israel is the most important issue. But it's a smaller group in America, and even among them, people who remember the Holocaust, who just understand what that state has meant, do not. In America, I think the support for Bibi Netanyahu is like 4 people. Like,
exactly.
Like, you don't even have, as the Jews say, a minyan. You don't have enough people to even have a prayer group of the people who support Bibi Netanyahu and what he's done. And that's partly true in Israel. I mean, people are protesting him every day there. So the idea that Americans, politicians, would go to bat for the policies of an enormously unpopular government in Israel, and one that is committing these atrocities in the and let's, my view, and I don't, just for a second, October 7th was terrible. Israel is not safer 2 years later. Israel says it's not safer. That's why it says it still has to be at war. But if 2 years of war haven't made you safer, then maybe you ought to question whether the 2 years of killing was worth anything.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree with all of that, and I think, like, so much there that you said when it comes to the starting with what you talked about, the civil war in the Jewish community. I mean, I'm married into a Jewish family. My wife is Jewish. My son is half Jewish, right? So I'm and I think if you think you hate Netanyahu, wait till you meet a progressive Jewish person. Trust me, you're not hating at your full capacity. Okay, so there is, there is a lot of vitriol at Netanyahu, even from some Zionists that I
That's
know.
absolutely right.
That where they're like, I acknowledge. So it's like there's a way to communicate about it where you can talk about how horrible he and his far right coalition is. Everyone acknowledges they've overreached. Even Trump cussed at him on the phone, telling him he's got to chill. Right. So I think like Israel, what Netanyahu has done has so overtly undermined the cause of Israel himself.
He's like Donald Trump. He's led that country into a dead end.
Yes,
And it's going to have to do some work to get out of it.
yes, exactly, and especially after October 7th, which was horrific on its own, flat out, no,
Yeah.
no way to dispute it. It was disgusting what Hamas did. Hamas undermined the Palestinian cause in that moment as well. And then Netanyahu went ahead and Biden warned him, don't overreach like we did after 9/11. And then he went further than that and obliterated entire populations of civilians and did horrific crimes, war crimes, and which I think is pretty objective there.
With enormous help from Donald Trump.
With enormous help from Donald Trump and a Biden who I think in his age did not recognize the new Israel he was dealing with. His mind was in the 80s, 90s. Israel was not in the Israel that we have today. And then
Which I do not understand, because as vice president, he had chance to see Bibi, and but Barack knew what Bibi was.
Oh, he saw him straight up. He clocked him, and that's why Bibi never liked him.
Yep. Yep. All right, enough of that. So that is an issue that Democrats can get past and voters can get past. Because in America, people haven't said, they're not in the place where they're saying Israel shouldn't exist, but they're saying this slaughter has got to end. Got to end. Can't keep funding this slaughter. It's not okay. It's terrible.
Yeah.
And by the way, the Board of Peace is not the answer.
No, the Board of Peace is not the answer. A bunch of people trying to grift and carve up different business interests there. No, that is not.
The latest was they're going to put a whole bunch of data centers there.
Just come on. Like you can't put you can't meld more unpopular positions together into like
they can find a way.
Like you're gonna throw
oh, this is where we can put the data centers.
It's like they want to pull at 0%. I just can't oh God, but
cruel. It's so cruel. Speaking of cruel, how is it that it's okay for the president of the United States to continue to say, I mean, I like Jean Pirro, the former Fox person who's now, gotten a big role as attorney, a prosecutor in the federal government. She finally said, look, there's no evidence that this Olympic athlete caused this problem, right? And so we say, okay, well, he should be free. But the outrage is that the president of the United States thought it's okay to take an innocent person and throw him in jail for 10 years, just because I want to cover my ass. I mean, is American freedom worth so little to this man?
It's worth nothing to this man. As we've talked about this, he has no moral compass whatsoever. It's whatever serves him in that moment. It doesn't matter who he brutalizes,
who the victims are,
who he wrongfully imprisons, who he targets. They're going after Anthony Fauci, which were the most despicable things I've ever seen. A man who dedicated his life to public health, indisputably. You got to just say that with your chest. Like I'm glad the TMZ, the TMZ guy had this. I'm not sure if you saw this viral moment where he literally just did a whole segment talking about how disgusting this was, and we need more of that, because
and yet the Senate is going to, the Republicans in the Senate, man, could care less. Again, it's like
they've held him in contempt.
It's a political suicide pact, and good, they should go down. But all right, so primary season, we've talked about Michigan. Primary season is almost completely over. I mean, we got Wisconsin's got some tricks ahead, but it is mostly over. How have Democrats done, do you think, in nominating candidates who can take back the House and maybe the Senate? How have we done?
I think, for the most part, a great job. I think you look at James Tallarico in Texas. You look at Mary Pauletta in Alaska. You look at Roy Cooper in North Carolina. Come on, to talk about a shoe. And I heard the Republicans stop spending money there because they're getting cooked over there. You look at the people we already have as incumbents, and Ossoff to hold the line. And then you look at these House races where district after district, if you just the 2025 elections and the special elections as like a barometer, we're seeing 10 to 20 point swings towards Democrats in some of these districts. And I think we've seen a lot of candidate district and candidate state fit in most
That is
cases.
really important.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a really important idea. And it's an idea that the Republicans don't have because they're a top-down party. You have
Mhm.
to fit with the president.
Yes,
In our
exactly.
party, I had this argument with somebody who said Democrats are in disarray. And I said, look, imagine you walk by and you see a softball game going on and you don't see coaches. You just see guys out playing. Do you say they can't play? They'll never figure it out. And if you have a league and you got 10,000 softball games going on in one league, they both have coaches, right? But one is like in Washington telling every team how to play every game. And the
Mhm.
other's got like in the off season, he makes some trades, but then he pays no attention. Who's more likely to win? Right? The one who like every decision about whether you bunt or not is made in 1,000 miles away, or somebody who's like right there.
Yeah, exactly. Just like there's a war metaphor too. Like when each battlefield's going to have a different set of circumstances. You can't have just
Yep.
one general at the top who's far off from the battlefield. You have to have a decentralized structure, right? It's the same situation here where you have individual districts, individual states that have totally different interests. You have a Abigail Spanberger type person, Mikey Sherrill type person, and then you have on the other side of the spectrum a Zohran Mamdani, right? That can win in the same election
Yes.
and
And
then they can work together. Like that's what
they work together. And
Governor
they
Hochul sorry, go ahead.
No, but I'm just the way to get democracy to work is to do it local like this. Because then the people who are elected, they are they love the districts they're in. They know
Yes.
the districts they're in, and they're fighting for the people in those districts, not for
Yes.
somebody else.
And
And
that's how you have
that
healthy debates.
and you get stuff done for people.
Yes.
So I don't think the fight, there's a lot of talk about like progressives have taken over the Democratic Party. And I don't know how you feel about that. I don't feel the difference between even some of the candidates you just named, right? They span a big left, right. Well, they don't. They span on the Democratic Party a big left, right, but they're pretty close in the grand scheme of things. I think this election was more about we are tired of let's make a deal and we want to play let's get done.
Yes, exactly. It's about fighters, people who are arguing a coherent message and
Mhm,
worldview. It's not
mhm.
just like I just want to be in power. I want to do the same thing. It's we believe this. We believe government should do this for people. And I do think obviously affordability is a tether between all of these people. An anti-corruption message is a tether.
Yeah, and
And
the
I think
billionaires don't get to buy all the power.
exactly. So we're starting to see this midterm cycle common threads between a lot of these candidates. And I think,
Mhm.
I'm happy the DNC is in such a weakened role. I do think they need to change. Ken Martin needs to go and they need to have a better build up more trust before they manage the primaries in 2028, but separate issue. But I think when it comes to like a platform, I don't know if the DNC should be in charge of the platform anymore. I think the party the candidate who wins or the candidate who like Obama, right? Like did we need a candidate who then brings their platform forward, ties all of this together, and then I think the
That's interesting.
Democratic Party will finally have a like cohesive party message. And like because I think right now it's all a bunch of decentralized like we talked about. There's some progressives here, and then so the Democrat that can identify the tether between all of these candidates and unite like we all agree on affordability. We might not all agree on these other issues, but it's clearly I think Israel's kind of becoming one of those that tethers every like I don't hear really anyone saying that. Well, actually, there are some APAC candidates that did win, like Wesley, beat Cody Bush. So I
Yeah.
think you stick to the simple stuff: affordability, anti-corruption, human rights, decency, and then you build a message around that. And the
That's
candidate
it.
that can do that
Yeah.
cohesively brings it all together.
All right. So do you have a favorite story from the primaries now that they're almost done? It was a pretty kind of amazing cycle in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many like as in like amazing who had the best like who had the one of the coolest journeys or like
Yeah, or just something, something. I mean, like I was struck um, right away uh, by the ad that was the first ad of the Paralympian basketball player
yes,
in Iowa. right? Who showed himself like crawling upstairs because and dragging his wheelchair behind him to go knock on doors. And you know what?
It's
He's
remarkable.
gonna win in Iowa.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And it's like, that's, no, that's wonderful. And then there's, yeah, if we're going that route, like I think James Talarico in Texas, like I had my media startup at the time. We interviewed him back in like 2018 when he was like a state running for state rep,
Yep,
and it's like watching his journey and transformation and defining that moral voice, like his moral leadership voice that he's developed here in Texas,
very
and
important.
seeing how it's like he ran a totally non-toxic primary in spite of what some people try to claim when they come at him. He was totally ran on above board. Like one of the least antagonistic primary races
Well,
I've ever
let's talk
seen.
about that. And
Yeah.
that's almost go back where we started. Texas has more Black Americans than any other state in the union. Right?
Mhm.
Not the highest percentage, but it's a big state. So more Black Americans live in Texas than live in any other state. And Talarico has made a point, right, of reaching out. I mean, he won a primary against Jasmine Crockett, and there were hard feelings. And he's made and uh, Black voters were disenfranchised by Texas in that primary when Texas
Yes.
did the kind of cheating that it does. And Texas is a disenfranchised people state.
Mhm.
So he's made a point of spending time in the Black community, talking about what he's going to do and how he's going to be, and listening and talking about strategies for fighting together. And that I think is a very good model for
Yes.
candidates.
Definitely. Abdul Al-Sayed could take notes from that. So many candidates can
Mhm.
take notes, candidates who aren't doing as well with Black voters. And yeah, I think James Salary done an excellent job making a point of that, being gracious, not being angry about the attacks he's gotten as well. And I think, yeah, I mean, I see it working from right here from, campaign people over there. It is
Yep.
working and they're seeing a lot of Black support. I see anecdotally some of these rallies. And I just got to say it candidly, and I might get heat for this because her fans are very powerful. I think Jasmine Crockett has to do a lot more. I think she has to stop saying things that undermine him. And that's just my take. She was asked this week about whether she thinks Texas will go blue, and she's like, I don't know, and I'm gonna just go support candidates I think can win. But some of the candidates she just supported this week didn't win. I think she has to do more because the general election is way more important than any one person's career or hurt feelings. And Talarico has to get you can't like tacitly let some of the vitriol being thrown at him continue to be thrown when that it wasn't really true. A lot of the anger at Talarico, like some people were saying he ran a racist primary, which is just not true.
Look, I don't know how,
I'm a black man saying that right now. So my
yeah.
point is, I just think we got to have people come together in the primary, um, and the general.
We got to learn from them. I mean, we've had the Republicans know our internal pain points and they drive wedges and we fall for them. I
Mhm.
mean, Bernie's crowd was peeled off and maybe was responsible for Donald Trump winning the first time,
Yeah,
right? Because they said Hillary will never support her, right? Because they lost the primary. Um, uh, we had the movement you were talking about in Michigan. I don't think that elected Donald Trump, but it might have elected him in Michigan. Uh, you
naturally.
know, um, so we have to learn from our mistakes and grow up and say we have like these fights we have with our friends are harder fights than those with, but we got to get over them.
Yeah, I mean Haley Stevens, I think deserves a little bit of props here for that was a really contentious, far more contentious than Texas
Yep.
or
And it
any of
took
the
her
other
about three
primaries I say.
seconds to say, I'm all in.
Had a preloaded statement.
Yeah.
All in. I'm proud to support you. Whitmer, who else I had kind of said that there were still potholes in Michigan that need to be filled, kind of like alluding to her statements.
Mhm.
Whitmer, I mean, like there is a thing where your ego is less important than our democracy. Whatever's going on, you rally behind what needs to happen, and that's what we saw with Haley Stevens, and I hope we see that with every other primary candidate
Leader.
that lost.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So I, like there were some, I think, lovely stories. We're going to still see some interesting stuff in Wisconsin next week. They have,
What are your thoughts on that race? The recent,
well, you know, like the Governor Evers has just stepped into the race. You know, he
yeah,
had been out of it, he hadn't done anything, and now he is worried that the seat could get lost. He doesn't know that Francesca Hahn can win. And she's very popular and she's run a campaign that people love,
yeah.
you know? So I I don't know, but I'm going to be spending some time between now and then getting to know about that race because it hasn't happened yet. And I've had trouble keeping up with the ones we've had all over the country till then. But what do you know about it? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I went to Wisconsin I've only been there one time. I was there early this year for the
Yep.
MLK speech I gave. So I got to meet, Governor Evers. I got to meet
Right.
Mandela Barnes and some of these other players here. And, I was kind of surprised at how this played out. Like I thought that, given how, Tony Evers kind of trying to graciously exit, right? He's retiring. I thought there would have been a bit more of a plan if they had, people in mind. And it seems that Francesca Hahn just came in here and was able to build the support that she needed. And
Yep.
I think like, there's a lot of being made about these interviews she had this Thanksgiving. I'm sure you saw she was asked about canceling Thanksgiving.
Yep.
Wasn't the greatest answer, but
Yeah, no. And
yeah.
it's an answer that the whole country will see if she's the nominee, because the Republicans will put it on TV like every day.
Yeah, so I think if she wins the primary, she just gotta tighten up on that, bring everything back to messaging, bring everything back to affordability. Could have said something like, "Oh, I don't want to cancel Thanksgiving," but I do think that some of these policies being pushed by Republicans could cancel Thanksgiving due to people changing plans because the things cost too much. This costs too much. That
Yep.
costs too much. XYZ. Here's my plan. So I
You
think
know, you're really good at this like messaging stuff.
I'm
Yeah.
trying. I'm trying.
Did you ever think of running?
I've been asked. I've been,
Yeah.
but it's just, I'd rather just do the media stuff. I feel like I make more of an impact there for now.
Yeah, you
Also
also have a newborn.
have a newborn, so yeah, it's not happening anytime soon. Also, that's more of a question for my wife than for me. Whether
These
she
are
wants.
family decisions.
Yes, these
For
are
sure.
family decisions. So at the moment in this political climate, I don't know,
Yeah.
but I just think Francesca Hong, I think she could pull it off. I think like some things get blown out of proportion, and everyone really cares more about the bottom line. I mean, if people can get away with being literally evil and depraved, then I think people have a gaffe here and there could end up working out.
All right. Between now and November, I think the chances that the Republican Party will have a epiphany and start to actually care about Americans is like zero. So I think they will not improve their odds of winning between now and November. I don't think Donald Trump will start doing things that are actually good for the country and decide not to just try and line his own pocket between now and November. So I think the Democrats, like, if we don't win, it's on us because
Yeah.
they are holding on to like disaster with both hands, right? They just like, how many rocks can I put in my pocket before I jump in the water?
Yeah, like the late Lindsey Graham once said, which was the most important thing I think he's ever said. Where he said, "If we nominate Trump, the Republican Party will be destroyed and will deserve it." And
Yeah.
they do
And it's
deserve it,
true.
and
All
it's
right,
true,
so
and it's
there's
happening.
that. So let's assume for a minute that we win. I now want to get your take on how we can make the country patient with our victory. Because
Yeah,
even if we win, right, he still controls the executive branch. Even if we get the Senate, we're not going to get a veto-proof majority under any circumstances at all. So we won't be able to pass any laws. And we're going to try and do oversight. And you know what? We'll subpoena folks and they won't show up.
yeah,
And the Justice Department will say, we don't care. We will not hold them accountable. We will not charge them with violating the subpoena. You can vote them in contempt of Congress from now to the cows come home. You can forward a request for us to charge them. There's a garbage can over there. We'll save you. We'll install one here in Congress so you don't even have to walk over to the Justice Department. We're not doing anything because we're crooked, right? So
yeah.
how do we say we are fighting for all this and we are going to win and we're going to win? But the truth is, while we can blunt some of what he does, real accountability and real progress isn't going to happen until that man is out of the White House.
Yeah, I think you run on telling the American people, we're going to hold this guy accountable. We're going to bog him down. We're going to basically try our best to halt the damage and stem the damage that's been done thus far. We're gonna continue to push our own agenda. There's only so much that they can do, but they're gonna get subpoena power, and they can halt all legislation, and they can bog them down, and that's really all that they can do. And they articulate that, and then when the next Democrat comes in 2028, they have to just move. We talk about flooding the zone; they flood the zone with their progress now, and they take advantage of some of the expanded power that the Supreme Court has granted
Yep.
the president. Not saying that they should be committing crimes or anything, but they should, all these norms and all of these things that Trump has railroaded, just, I guess we can just destroy agencies, rebuild them then. Just bring back USAID, right?
Right, like the Democratic candidates to say Donald Trump said he was your retribution, and and because of that, he never tried to be the president of the whole country, not for 1 second. He was never your president or mine, and he didn't want to be.
No.
Right, so I get that. So Democrats got to say, look, we've had enough with retribution politics, but there will be accountability. Like, you know what? If there's a storm hits Texas, we aren't going to say you don't get disaster relief like this crook does, because you're Americans. But the crooks who said it, we're going to hold them accountable.
Yes.
Don't be confused by the difference.
Exactly. Accountability, basically accountability, well, not affordability, but accountability, execution of their actions, and healing. Like, we got to heal, bring the country together, execute on an effective vision, actually create a bold vision for what you want to do, and pursue it with everything you have. If Trump was out here, issuing executive orders, dismantling everything, issue a flurry of executive orders, rebuilding everything, and let Congress challenge you. Let Congress try to tell you can't rebuild USAID, even though they had initially congressionally created it. Tell them that you can't rehire tens of thousands
Congress
of civil servants.
It'll be our Congress. They'll be
exactly. Well, that's what I'm saying.
But, we got to rebuild it differently. We have a chance to we have a chance to build a new country on the ruins of this guy.
Exactly.
And I am looking forward to that. It's keeping this old man alive, because I want to be part of that. Hey, thank you for your time today. I love this conversation, and I look forward to our next one.
Thank you. Great to talk to you as always. Everyone always leave feeling enlightened. So thank you for having me as always.
You're listening to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody, I have a treat for you. Rachel Cohen practices law, and boy, she drew a lot of attention when she quit her job at one of the major corporate law firms in America after it caved and cut a deal with the Trump administration. She made headlines again when she decided to, I don't know how to say this, she used TikTok to teach people how to resist ICE when they were here in the city. And that's the kind of work that she continues to do. Rachel, thank you for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me.
So before we get into some specifics about what you're doing, you're really smart, and you spent a lot of time studying to become a lawyer, and you do legal work. So I kind of want to get your take on what's happening to law in America. And I guess I want to start with what's happening to law firms. This week, the New York Times published that investigation into the decision-making at Paul Weiss, the first big firm to cut that deal. And for those of you who don't know, Paul Weiss had a well-earned reputation as a fighter for the rights of Americans. And then it grew its M&A practice, and deciding for those pesky rights might irk some of their more profitable clients. So what do you think is going on with law firms that they're sort of less interested in law than in profits?
I think it's been a long time coming that law firms have been less interested in law than profits. And I want to put a fine point and just want to say that many articles also got this wrong. So in terms of background reading, sometimes it's difficult to figure out what's the correct order of operations. But I actually left for my law firm after Paul Weiss made the deal. And I was not employed at Paul Weiss. I worked at a different firm called Skadden Arps. And the reason that I did that was because I had been proactively organizing to try to get law firms to stand up to the Trump administration, present a united front in response to a number of executive orders he was entering that were attempting to pressure law firms out of taking on certain clients. And it was abundantly clear to me that if law firms did not stand together, that there would be a real weakening of access to counsel in the United States, despite the fact that law firms are not accessible kind of providers of counsel to the average American, that it was setting a dangerous example in terms of allowing the Trump administration to come after lawyers due to the clients and causes that they were representing. And so I left about 8 days before my own law firm, Skadden Arps, entered into a deal with the Trump administration, and I did so because it was abundantly clear to me that it was coming, not through any inside information, but based off looking at Paul Weiss's response, listening to the overwhelming silence of my own employer, and making an inference. And so I think I put a fine point on that only because something that has driven me a bit crazy is the kind of fake shock that we're seeing from many industry insiders who are surprised that people were deeply motivated by profit. Now that there are these exposés of Paul Weiss that are surprised that these were poor decisions and that law firm leaders assumed that they could out-negotiate Donald Trump because they think that they're really smart and he's really dumb, despite being outplayed by him for now the better part of a decade, because he is willing to go completely outside the rules of the game, right? And so all of that to say that we're seeing a real weakening of a norm-based institution. The law, the court system, all of these things are largely governed by people just kind of tacitly agreeing that they're going to operate a certain way. And we're seeing what happens when someone in a lot of power refuses to agree to operate that way. Here, the example would be to say that lawyers are distinct from their clients and that everyone deserves representation. But I think that that, too, is an extension of inconsistently applied norms and ideas of justice that we've seen, and particularly the criminal legal system, for a very long time, and the way that we have allowed corporations to buy the kind of representation that makes it impossible for individual consumers to ever really stand up to them because they don't have the money to go toe-to-toe. And so we're seeing the disintegration of norms and also a logical extension of what happens when you allow the law to apply unequally to people.
Well, that's frightening. Let me probe that just a little further. Kirkland, I think, began this, becoming, I want to say this properly, a company whose product is legal services rather than a firm that practices law. It's a nuanced difference, but I think a real one. It's moving away from law as a profession to a product, and the ethos of practice to that of profit. They work differently, and they have very different outcomes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, again, that's kind of, you've identified something that is really troubling, and that I think is an extension of the fact these firms charge $3,000 an hour for top performers. These are not people that are providing legal services that are equitable or fair. For the most part, corporate law firms exist because large companies want a lot of very qualified people who are willing to work 90 hours a week to grind themselves into dust so that whoever is going up against them gets outworked because they can afford to pay for it. And a lot of the law, the practice of law at this point, is just delaying, and it's not really practiced whatsoever, especially in kind of these corporate spheres.
Well, but lawyers are, I think, the only profession where the code of being a lawyer requires pro bono, as opposed, it's supposedly baked into, right? Supposedly baked into the profession. And for a long time, Americans could count on these big law firms using their talent for causes where people couldn't pay. The shock that began with Paul Weiss was that they were going to turn that talent away from people who really need it and be directed by the administration about where they should put it. And that politicized pro bono entirely.
Sure. And I do want to put a fine point on kind of the nature of pro bono in the corporate legal industry, because I think that for many people, it is very much a true deep calling. I know that I spent many, many hours doing pro bono when I was a corporate attorney because it was important to me to represent migrants. But I will say that much of the kind of reputation of big law firms as particularly valuable pro bono partners is rooted in their own marketing departments. And where they tend to be the most important is where they can provide immense amounts of resources and labor. And so just to say the idea of being able to rely on big law firms generally, I think is something that I would just push back on a little bit, not because I think that it's not kind of common wisdom, but because I think that it emerges from the marketing department of firms. Because these places would not do, for example, pro bono criminal defense. They would not, there were many places where they would not step into the gap out of fear that they would come into conflict with existing clients. And so just in general, I think that we're seeing, unfortunately, quite a bit of honesty about what is driving legal representation in this country. But I think you're exactly right to identify the specific escalation of like deference to the administration and almost being directed by the administration as a major, major, major escalation and one of the driving factors in my decision to resign.
We've seen a slashing. And in fact, the Republicans in Congress, I think, zeroed out legal services. So for a long time, I mean, the Supreme Court said, 50 years ago, that people were entitled to a lawyer when they're in court, and
only in criminal court. So that
in criminal
actually
court,
does not.
in criminal court, right?
But bear in mind, again, just for your listeners, that does not include, for example, people in immigration proceedings. Just relevant for the moment.
Because, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's absolutely. But even in criminal cases, legal services has been zeroed out. Legal services covers more than criminal cases, but they zeroed it out, and that's for people who can't pay the bill. And you're right to turn to immigration. Immigration courts are not Article 3 courts. So why don't you talk to people about the problem with representation in immigration cases?
Oh, God, we only have a half an hour, so I'll try and keep it high level. But the problem with immigration court and immigration cases at this point, honestly, starts with the judges themselves, who are directly appointed by the executive branch, the Trump administration. And we saw him fire dozens and dozens of immigration judges in multiple different kind of rounds of termination, firing people who were granting asylum at high rates. And so you have immense executive control. They not only appoint and can fire all of the judges, but they also, whenever they would like to, can enter into a kind of sua sponte role where the Attorney General of the United States can issue an opinion in any immigration case they want, whenever they want. And so if a judge or the Board of Immigration Appeals, which is the administrative appellate level of that court system, issues a decision that they don't like, the administration can just void it. So,
well, of course, the Supreme Court has told us that there are no independent people in the executive branch. None.
That's certainly true.
So they just, whatever if the president says no, doesn't matter what your case is, we're going to say no, you say no. That's what the Supreme Court said is what our Constitution calls for.
Yep. And that is, I think, one of those areas where I think we're really seeing the limitations of a norms-based system, because the Supreme Court, there's a norm that you don't behave that way, and there's that independence. But the immigration sphere has always been subject to more executive control, even under what I would deem much more normal and traditional executives. So
sure, because it's an Article 1 court, two courts, sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have kind of that backdrop, and then on top of that, violations of immigration law are civil violations. And so the Supreme Court case that you referenced earlier, Gideon v. Wainwright, that guaranteed right to counsel for low-income criminal defendants, that access to counsel, that guarantee of counsel, does not extend to civil legal systems, which is also a huge issue when, for example, people are in eviction court.
Well, wait, stick with it. I just want to take one little piece of what you said, because it's so I want to say again, if you violate an immigration law, if you're here asking for asylum and you're late for court, this is a civil, not a criminal violation. So when you hear the president say all of these people are criminals because of they're violating immigration law, like what does that even mean?
It means that he lies, right? Like you've struck on it exactly. And to be even
It's
just
like you're
to give
reading
him
my
the
mind,
mass benefit of
Rachel.
the doubt.
Yep.
Yeah. Like even to give him the mass benefit of the doubt, if you've already been deported and re-enter, sometimes that can be a criminal offense and it is a misdemeanor. And I find it insane. I'm assume you're following what's going on with U.S. Representative Max Miller. I'm following it quite closely because I am a native Ohioan. But to have Donald Trump himself with the Epstein files, with many, many violations of tax code that are criminal violations, with fraud, with many credible allegations of sexual abuse and assault against him.
Well, actual convictions, let's be clear, not just actual convictions for assault and slander and for fraud.
Yep. And so we have someone who is saying that people are criminals because they have the functional equivalent of a parking ticket, because that is what it is to be in the United States without legal documentation. It is a parking ticket.
Yeah. Okay, so you're doing stuff about this. Talk about, like, ICE was in Chicago before they went to Minneapolis, and I was very proud of my city and what we did to push them out of Chicago. And Minneapolis took the lessons we learned and improved upon them. And I'm in awe of what they did up there in the snow. But ICE is back, and they are more effective and less obvious than they were.
Yep.
Talk about what you're doing to help people learn how to protect themselves.
I want to tease out the excellent point that you just made about ICE being back and more effective than ever, because we are very much seeing that, and it does connect to the ways that I think are perhaps the most useful to get involved in terms of joining rapid response networks that are tracking the kinds of license plates that ICE is using or the vehicles. Because I think that the Trump administration, every once in a while, as they are kind of pushing the boundaries of the norms-based order that I've been coming back to over and over again, every once in a while they overplay their hands. And I think that's something that we should find quite heartening, that he cannot actually just do anything and get away with it. And if people would stand up for themselves, for each other, that we would see that much less. This is back to law firms. But I think they overplayed their hands in the kind of mass invasions that we saw in Chicago and Minneapolis, because you have these blue cities in blue states where people are really, really drawing attention and standing up, and you have the visuals that look like an invasion. And so what they have done instead is two things. The first, there have been really dramatic invasions of cities in red states where the governors are enabling Donald Trump that have gotten very little national coverage. And so he's continued to do that because there hasn't been the same kind of wave of outrage and resistance that we saw from the state of Illinois and the state of Minneapolis. So, for example, in Memphis, there was a National Guardsman who shot and killed someone, I believe, like 2 weeks ago, that got almost no national coverage whatsoever, right? And then the second thing that we're seeing is exactly like you said, the kind of under the radar targeted enforcement operations, quote unquote enforcement operations, targeted kidnappings of people, where ICE will basically come in to a workplace, to a home, snatch somebody, be out in 10 minutes. And that makes it very, very difficult to mobilize. Whereas when you have 1,000, 3,000 ICE agents or officers in like military kit roaming the streets, it's pretty easy to follow those people around and make their lives harder. So I think the most effective things to be done here are to get trained on basic Know Your Rights info here in Illinois. ICER, the Illinois Coalition of Immigrant and Refugee Rights Organizations, I think.
Yes, they're fabulous.
Coalition for
And
Immigration
Fred is
Refugee Rights.
fabulous. Yep.
Yep. OCAD, which is actually run by many people who were directly impacted by the immigration system. They have these trainings, they have hotlines, and they really need people to staff them and to get kind of placed in rapid response groups. So I think that is the most immediately helpful thing. I think learning basic Spanish or brushing up on basic Spanish, particularly here in Chicago, if you are not already conversational, is really, really helpful. And I also think, and this has always been where I see my role, I think that if you're someone that has a lot of privilege, especially based in identity, if you are a white U.S. citizen, I think you need to get comfortable going not just to protests like No Kings that are permitted and that are not directly confrontational, but get comfortable going to protests at ICE facilities like in Broadview, because ultimately that kind of interruption is going to be the only thing that really indicates to the administration that what they're doing is unpopular, right? That's why they had to shift approach, was because Chicago, Minneapolis, you had people chasing ICE agents through the streets. You know?
Well, Greg Bovino was a great target. And so leaving the other part of what you're saying of showing up there matters. There's a concept amongst folks who look at dissent anywhere in the world, and it is a concept of accompanying people, right? If you're not the target, accompany someone who is. And it turns out that is a rewarding experience for you who is accompanying, but it also makes the people you're standing with stronger and gives them some more courage. And look, in Chicago, for those of you who are listening who aren't in Chicago, Little Village is a mostly Mexican neighborhood. It's where a lot of ICE focus was, but they also showed up in a neighborhood called Lincoln Park, which is a mostly white, wealthier neighborhood. And when they showed up in that neighborhood, people ran out of their houses in their bathrobes and chased ICE away. And that evening, I heard from my friends in Little Village how important it was for them to see people in this very different neighborhood standing up basically for them. And so accompanying people is a hugely important thing. And you have demonstrated that time and again, Rachel.
Thank you. And I will also say sometimes that can be really fun. Like which is something nobody really comes back to, but the idea of showing up and being with your neighbors and in community is generally joyful, but also oftentimes in Chicago especially, where people really need white allies, U.S. citizen allies to show up and show support are these big cultural festivals that they're worried are going to be targeted by ICE agents. For example, I had someone reach out to me about like a Latin music festival on Navy Pier. I think this coming weekend or next weekend. There's Sonido in Pilsen next weekend. And one of the asks for rapid responders and allies is literally to just go to these festivals and be present and be alert and able to kind of warn people if you see agents and interrupt and give people time to get away if they need, right?
And document. and
you
witness.
To go to a festival and document. Exactly.
That's fabulous. Before we run out of time, I want to ask you about your home state, Ohio. What's going on there with the Haitian migrants who are there? A year ago, we had the vice president say they're eating their neighbors' cats and dogs. He later admitted he was lying, but said, you know what, the lie made people think. Well, what they make honest people think is that he's an but nonetheless, this kind of naked racism is part of what we're dealing with here. And now I understand in Ohio, they are systematically attaching leg monitors to the Haitian migrants so they can properly process them in an orderly way to to prisons and then out of the country. And at the same time, although they're not yet related, but at the same time, we hear that the administration is buying decommissioned prisons around the country because they've been stopped from opening their mega mall jails. What is happening in Ohio, and how do we tell people this story in a way that resonate, that people will understand the inhumanity of it?
What's happening in Ohio is an extension of something that we've seen across the country, which is Donald Trump taking people who have legal status in this country, changing the rules because of the amount of executive authority exists in the immigration system, and making it so that these people no longer have legal status, despite the fact that they have been fully in compliance throughout their time in the United States. So many, many people from Haiti in Ohio were there on a legal status called temporary protected status, which exists for people who are in the United States fleeing some kind of disaster in their home country. Sometimes it's a war, most of the time it's a natural disaster. And so people who have entered the United States from Haiti following the earthquake in, I believe, 2021, I know there's been a couple, I don't remember when TPS started for them exactly, people were allowed to stay, to work in this country. There was no pathway to permanent legal status based on this TPS status, but there was an ability to work and to kind of build a life. And Donald Trump's administration has been withdrawing TPS for every country that has come up for a potential TPS renewal. All of those countries have been countries that are predominantly non-white. The only country that has TPS designation that is predominantly white is Ukraine, and their renewal has not come back up. And so we'll see what happens there. But that kind of making people illegal, or making people's status no longer legal while they have been in compliance consistently, and then using that to say that they are deporting people who are here illegally, is a sleight of hand that is really, really scary to many people who are even here on green cards or who are naturalized citizens, and it's understandable why. And so this kind of abuse of the legal system and also of racism, and I do have to give two quick shout outs. The first to my friend John Russell at More Perfect Union, who just won an Emmy for going to Springfield, interviewing the people who initially reported the missing cat that led to J.D. Vance making the comment that you referenced earlier, and then getting on camera the cat walking across the room and saying, "Is that the cat?" And they said, "Yes." So cat's just there. We always knew that people were not eating cats and dogs, but literally there's journalists on the ground like picking up the cat and showing it to people, and you still have people repeating these like racist narratives and lies and tropes. And the second to our own kind of Haymarket Books here in Chicago, which just put out last month a book called How to Close a Camp that outlines many, many routes to effective protests at especially the municipal level to slow the opening of additional detention facilities and camps to hold people in this country, which I think is incredibly urgent.
Yeah, and you can do this, and while this is what you're talking about was focused here in Chicago, it's going on all over the country. So wherever you are listening to this, you can actually stop, and people have stopped the administration from building its internal gulag.
Yep, absolutely. And preventing the opening of new camps is usually a bit easier than getting an existing one closed, but obviously we've got to focus on both.
Yeah.
Yep.
Rachel, I think yesterday, or maybe not yesterday, but sometime this week, Donald Trump signed 2 new executive orders, trying once again to eliminate parts of birthright citizenship. Your friends at the Supreme Court, by only 5-4, can read the words that if you're born in the United States, you are a citizen of the United States, and only 5 of 9 judges could read that and understand what it means. So he's at it again. Why does it just, why do you think it matters, birthright citizenship? And what happens in a country if the president can just take away people's citizenship?
Birthright citizenship matters both practically as a kind of foundational, and we have something called reliance interests, right? When we're talking about contracts, for example, where
Yep.
people make plans based on expecting things to happen a certain way because
Yep.
that's what was promised to them. And you can't just change that up, right? But I think the consistency and the meeting expectations is a very important reason. But then I think that there's a much more important symbolic reason, and I think that Ketanji Brown Jackson, as she always does when she dissents, did an excellent job driving this point home in her dissent. Birthright citizenship in this country exists because we had to ensure that people who had been enslaved in this country had citizenship, because that was a legal gray area. People that had been trafficked to this country were not officially citizens. And so the update of this language in the Constitution was necessary to make sure that people had access to, at least were supposed to have access to, the full rights of citizenship in this country. And that is
it's an amazing thing. It's an amazing. I lived in parts of the world where I worked in parts of the world for a long time where there was no birthright citizenship, and the king or the emir could make somebody a citizen, but could also take those rights away if they didn't like what they were doing. And to say all the rights of being an American can be stripped away because of somebody's politics means the people are no longer free.
Politics, and once again, the repetition of race-based discrimination in this way, because that is exactly who Donald Trump is targeting with the rollback of birthright citizenship, despite the fact that, of course, this also has major implications for people of all races and backgrounds.
You mean like his wife?
Including his wife with kind of her visa status, many other people. I saw this terrible article about how someone in the administration basically called ICE on a friend's ex-wife in order to bully her in like a custody battle. This is a nation, often to our a bit of shame, frankly, this is a nation of immigrants. We are, unless you are indigenous to this land, you came here from somewhere else. And I think it is morally abhorrent. If we want to claim that moniker, that should still come with real reflection on settler dynamics in this country. But to claim that and then to strip access to citizenship away from people while you yourself are not native to the land is appalling.
Well, that is, we've run out of time, Rachel, so that's got to be our last word. But I really appreciated this conversation and your work. If people just want to follow the work that you do, how do they do it?
I am generally available on social media at Cohen, COHEN.489, and I'm also on Substack with occasional essays at Cohen489.substack.com. And thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Rachel. I really appreciate the conversation.
You're listening to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody, I have a treat for you. Tim Murphy is national correspondent with the absolutely fabulous and important Mother Jones, which I've told you about 100 times. We really need to read. It is a great source of independent reporting, and it's real reporting on what's going on in America. And Tim, you wrote this fabulous piece that I read. I'm glad to meet you, and I'm glad that you're here. Actually, I've read several of your fabulous pieces, but the one I want to talk to you about is this amazing thing you did on data centers and on the not just the data centers themselves, but the structure of money in the United States that's behind it. So let talk me through a little bit about what drew you to this story and where did you take it?
Yeah, and so this was a cover story I did for the magazine for our May-June issue. You could find it all at motherjones.com. And, the idea is that a few years ago, shortly after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there had been an enormous amount of chatter in the United States about oligarchs, right? We're talking about sanctioning oligarchs. We were going to find their yachts, their assets, their unearned riches, and confiscate them. And oligarchy was this sort of term that you would use to understand a really broken Russian system. And what we wanted to do at that moment in time was kind of turn the mirror to us and say, like, okay, if these kind of elites extracting all of these resources and money out of their system and stashing it in offshore accounts or onshore accounts or buying up
buildings in Manhattan
buildings in Manhattan, if that is the emblem of a kind of a failing society, well, then what does it say about our society, where you have this increasingly small group of increasingly powerful people hoarding resources from an extractive industry, tech, not zinc, and using that to kind of get a greater and greater control over the economic and political kind of world. So we did that, and that was in around 2023, 2024. And within a couple of years, it seemed like the situation had gone, to use the term that Silicon Valley uses for its data centers, it had gone hyperscale. Like the things that we were talking about, the scale of wealth concentration that we were talking about 2 years ago was obsolete. The amount of investment in the AI boom specifically had concentrated so much money into so few companies from so few people that we're entering an entirely different age from this oligarchic age we were talking about 2 years ago. We were in the hyperscale oligarchy. So I wanted to look at what that actually looks like on the ground, because the difference between this current moment and even a few years ago, even before this kind of right before this AI boom, is it wasn't as visceral then. We knew, we didn't like big tech companies if you were forced to use them all the time. People had their issues with Uber, Lyft, Facebook. But it didn't come into your backyard, take all your water, raise your utility bill, and take your job. Maybe one of those three if you were in the wrong industry. That's what's happening in communities all across the country, very far away from Silicon Valley, places that might not think that they're in kind of the same, economic realm at all. And so these metaphorical structures of inequality have now increasingly become physical structures of inequality that kind of look like what they represent, just these intimidating, loud, whitewashed edifices just can't avoid.
Just help people understand the scale of these edifices.
It's the scale, but I'd say the first thing that you really have to think about is the sound. I drove down to a cul-de-sac in Memphis, Tennessee to kind of get a close glimpse of what Elon Musk calls Colossus 2, which is his second hyperscale data center in Memphis. And it sounds like you're standing behind an airplane on the tarmac. And this is, there's a house right next to me as I'm doing this. This is what people just have to live with in communities all across the country. These things never shut off. And if they happen to be training like an AI program or something like that at the moment, they're really, really, really humming. And the sound you're hearing is also the sound of generators powering them. You're getting the sound of not just the servers, but also the power that's operating all of this. And these are just dropping in everywhere. And now some of these are like kind of run-of-the-mill things that make this interview possible, right? I mean, you need data centers for the internet. We wouldn't like it if there were no data centers, at least with the world that we currently live in. But, a lot of these are to power a speculative AI boom that is just, a whole lot of money going towards something that you may not really think benefits you. So I set out to see some of these places and spend some time in some of these communities, to talk to people in communities that are dealing with, and to just watch hours and hours and hours of local commission meetings where people, finally had a chance to kind of confront officials who were pushing these projects, often with NDAs, often on behalf of companies that were never identified. And this has turned into maybe the kind of most salient local politics flashpoint of the last 2 years.
Okay, so these centers are loud, they're enormous. I mean, it's unimaginable how big they are for people who haven't. Some of them are for people who haven't seen it, and they come into a community. And what happens at these town hall meetings, or these public meetings, these government meetings?
Yeah, and I should just say, because I talked about the sound, to give you a sense of it, I mean, take an Amazon distribution center and then multiply it by like 6. Or, as Mark Zuckerberg did, take a map of Manhattan and then take about a third of it. And that's your square footprint, for a Meta hyperscale data center in Louisiana. That happened to be a place that I spent a lot of time. So what happens is...
Imagine a third the size of Manhattan. It's unimaginably big.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically like kind of from Soho on south. I mean, I don't have the exact specs there, but they are measuring them in units of Central Park, more or less. And so in a lot of these places, what we saw is the data center would kind of come in through maybe a third-party operator. It's not like Meta itself in a lot of these cases, just to name a random company, is coming in and saying, hey, we're Meta, we'd like to build a data center here, right? A lot of this is done through kind of like a third-party developer, broker, or something like that. Complete anonymity for the company, the ultimate beneficiary company who's going to be training their AI models there, whatever that tech company that you've heard of is. And they're getting all of the local officials, from the mayor of a town of like 1,000 people to, commissioners to kind of all of the interested parties to sign NDAs for kind of competitive reasons. And then they're kind of negotiating all of this stuff, or they're using some earlier agreement for a different project and kind of co-opting their project into that. So it's kind of already got some approvals. And so, like, by the time regular people have heard of it, the ground is already being broken on something like this. So in the case of this OpenAI facility in Abilene, Texas, which is sort of this famous OpenAI facility now, it's like their flagship, it feels like going by an Air Force base under construction. I mean, it's enormous. To do that, there had been an approval years earlier for what people thought might be an ammonium plant, and then they thought it might be a Bitcoin mining plant, and then the first that people really heard that it was going to be this AI facility was when Sam Altman showed up at the White House to say, hey, this is what we're building in Abilene. So people are really blindsided by this stuff.
Well, why isn't local government doing its job? Well, I mean, aren't people throwing it? I mean, I was a Chicago alderman when I was a young man, right? And if somebody wanted to build something and wanted a zoning change to do it, we had public meetings. We talked about it. And if somebody said to me, you need to sign an NDA to negotiate this with me and don't tell your constituents, I would have told them to go jump in Lake Michigan.
And if you went to a local government meeting in 2025, 2026, you would have heard a lot of people saying something like that. Maybe the Great Lake is a little bit different. It depends. I mean, Wisconsin, Michigan, I mean, these have been huge battlegrounds. Sam Altman actually had to go in person to kind of, beg for permission recently. So what happened is, until quite recently, these things would just kind of happen. You'd have data centers. And the data centers that we were talking about were, again, more terrestrial data centers, not something that you want in your backyard, but not at the scale of Central Park or Manhattan. And so it wasn't quite the same symbolic and real physical issue as a hyperscale data center. It's the difference between building a park and building an Air Force base.
Like, they build these hyperscale things. Do they tell the people who live around them, hey, we're going to use up all your water. We're going to drive your electricity rates way up. You're not going to be able to sleep because of the noise. but you know what, the world's going to be better because of it? Or do they just say, there's nothing you can do about it, stand down, your leaders have already been paid for, we're coming in?
They generally don't lead with the noise. I think there has been, in the past, some kind of that, there's been an economic push, right? We get tax breaks, and in exchange, you get a little bit of tax revenue for us that you wouldn't have had. And so if you are in a place like, let's say Loudoun County, Virginia, you might be in a position where a substantial part of your annual budget is now coming from, taxes from data centers. Now, you might say that they're kind of a winner of this as long as you're fine with the data centers next door. So financially,
construction jobs, their trades are working to build.
Yeah. There's short-term trades jobs, and then there's a lot fewer kind of longer-term jobs. But if some counties are getting a substantial amount of their budgets for that, and people are always looking for a company that can come in and say, we can guarantee you $1 million or whatever the revenue is over an X year period. And so that has historically been the sell. And of course, we've been talking about a different kind of data center. Now that you're talking about the hyperscale sites, these Central Park sized sites, they've really crystallized what else you're getting when you're getting a data center, in part because they're ramping that up times 10 or 20 or 100. And so then these issues that have been percolating for a while, like how much power is this going to need? How many power plants are we going to have to build from scratch to power it? What kind of power plants are those going to be?
Well, it's not just the plants themselves, the whole grid needs work.
The entire grid needs work. In Louisiana, Richland Parish, Louisiana, one of the poorest parishes in the state of Louisiana, northeast corner of the state, kind of in the Mississippi River Delta. That's where Meta's Hyperion data center complex is being built. And in that parish, right next to the data center, they have to build 2 new natural gas plants just from scratch, just to power the data center.
Isn't somebody trying to reopen 3 Mile Island just to...
Microsoft was negotiating to reopen 3 Mile Island specifically to power its data centers. There's plans to develop nuclear power plants to power facilities in Ohio. So it has had to.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Has anybody explained to Americans what's the long-term value economically, culturally, socially, strategically of making this enormous national investment in AI? I mean,
I think the short answer is no, and I think that's why you have seen the data centers themselves become
the target,
tip of the spear for a broader, and I would say increasingly very bipartisan, nonpartisan backlash to AI as an industry. That so much of the pitch for these data centers, maybe it's being made behind the scenes to, your local county commissioners.
Who signed an NDA. That's not how democracy works.
And that's not really a pitch that's just an economic, set of here's what we're going to get you. The pitch that you get is somebody going on CNBC to say, like, we're winning the race for AGI against our competitor. It's not a pitch to the people of America about how this product we're developing will help our lives. The advertisements that they've been, running on TV have been for really kind of ticky-tack stuff that, like we can write an email to your kid's favorite athlete or something. Like, they really missed the story on that. And by the time that they realized they missed the chance to tell whatever story they wanted to tell, this backlash has gotten completely out of hand.
Yeah, it's the arrogance of these billionaires to think that they could run all over us. We wouldn't care. You wrote this. I want to just read you a sentence because I loved it. If the economic story of the last 2 decades was consolidation of wealth and power in Silicon Valley, the story of the last few years is what tech billionaires want to do with that money and power.
Yeah, and I think, we've seen like the images that kind of, speak to this. You can just imagine like this meeting at the White House last summer, where some of the biggest names in the AI industry all kind of gathered to kiss Donald Trump's ring. Mark Zuckerberg was there, Sam Altman was there, Greg Brockman was there, Bill Gates was there, all kind of going around the room praising Donald Trump in the hopes that we would be able to kind of maintain this extremely kind of carte blanche attitude from the White House to kind of do whatever you want in terms of the AI build out. There had been like this kind of steady rise of concentration driven by Silicon Valley that have been, that I kind of talked about, where, we're definitely drifting toward kind of oligarchy territory. But the sheer volume of money, I mean, just the hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars sloshing around this one specific kind of building boom, you have to go back to like the transcontinental railroads to get that kind of.
They told us why it was important for us, why it would let us be a nation that spans a whole continent, what it would mean for farmers to get their grains to markets of both coasts. We had these conversations. I have been paying attention to AI, and I still don't know what the biggest funders of AI say they're trying to do. What do they tell us they're trying to build in our future? I worry, because I read other things that Peter Thiel and his gang have said, and it leads me to believe that they intend to replace politics, which at least here in a democracy aspires to make people sovereign and responsible for their own futures. They intend to replace that with tech as the agent of social and economic progress, not just technological progress, but social and economic progress as well. They want to have tech set that policy and not democratic politics. And that means we're no longer a free people. And that worries me. And I haven't heard them tell us instead what it is that they want to do with all of this power.
Yeah, and I think that's a really kind of interesting direction that this goes. And there's different spokes of this. Peter Thiel is
the fascist spoke.
I won't put words into his mouth, but he seems to lean more.
His own words are bad enough. I'm just editing, down.
Yeah, he certainly does not seem like he's a particularly diehard supporter of democracy. Sam Altman doesn't strike me as the same kind of outlook as Thiel, but he's very explicit that ushering in this new golden age will require us to come up with some new kinds of system, like some new way of like deciding what we want as a society, some entirely new way of distributing resources. Like he's basically just come out and said, like, this is going to be an entirely new chapter of human history, and we'll have to completely reimagine our political system in order to accommodate this technology. But
the tech comes first, so you're not going to have a chance to reimagine it.
Yeah, it almost reminds me of this line that Nancy Pelosi was sort of unfairly pilloried for back in 2009 when the Affordable Care Act, of all things, was about to pass, which is we have to pass the bill to find out what's in it. This argument has been, well, we can't really tell you what this post-artificial general intelligence future will look like, but we absolutely need to get there, and then we'll find out, and you'll probably love it. They really haven't given you that vision except to kind of say, but it'll be beautiful, it'll be great, we'll all be kind of rich, we'll have so much time to kind of do whatever we want and co-create the future together. That's Sam Altman's term that he uses, right? He says, what people really want is the agency to kind of co-create the future. And he believes that, instead of kind of the democratic process or just like having a regular job, having access to like a certain amount of hours or whatever on ChatGPT will kind of satisfy people's desire for a good life. So you do have this situation where this very small group of people whose views I would say are not especially normal, right? Like they're all kind of red pilling each other in their group chats or in their kind of retreats, are setting about to kind of somewhat publicly talk about how they're playing God with the future of the United States. And what we've seen over the last few years is that people can hear that and they don't like it.
I'm very worried about it. And I'm not a Luddite. I love new technology, and I use AI occasionally I've used it to code because I can't code. And there's some things I want done, and it's helped me do them. But I do worry that we do not know what we're creating. And there's an enormous economic risk spending. I mean, it's a tulip bubble. If it bursts, they'll take everybody down. So they do owe us clarity about what it is that they think they're creating, what it is they think it will do. And we need to have a better understanding of how we have a say in our future.
Yeah, and I think that conversation has sort of been forced through all of these town halls. You're now seeing a flurry of kind of different kinds of proposals, in the political realm about how we can sort of make sense of all of this, right? Like you have calls for a total AI moratorium, a total, data center moratorium or an AI moratorium. You have, pushes for like OpenAI is sort of trying to get ahead of this and saying, well, we need to develop a kind of universal basic income for, after money kind of.
And a regulatory framework. And we have Elon Musk saying, I'm going to build data centers on the moon. Give me more money. I'll do that. By the way, hint, anybody who does, say goodbye to that cash.
Yeah. And so much of that conversation as Musk, I think, embodies, as Altman embodies to a certain degree, is so much of this is just kind of hype to keep the hype going. It's hype to keep kind of the bubble growing.
Yeah, it's dangerous.
And these construction projects and these proposals and these people coming to the community and promising the moon, not in the Muskian way, but in the, we'll fill your budget needs kind of way, come laced with that idea, with, that seed of doubt that is this thing you're selling us and telling us to kind of clear farmland for and clear our budget for real? Or is this just kind of a play in your kind of mano-a-mano competition with Musk or
here
Google?
in the Great Lakes, we remember a thing called Foxconn, right? Foxconn was, of course, Governor Scott Walker's deal that was going to build the biggest, with China, the biggest manufacturing center in North America. It was going to give God knows how many jobs and create God knows how much money for the state. And it was a complete failure.
Yeah, I think it produced something like 1,300 jobs after $3 billion in incentives. And, I watched a town hall meeting in Menominee, Wisconsin, where an unnamed tech giant was planning on building a massive hyperscale data center. The plan was ultimately scuttled, and the residents at this extremely heated town hall meeting, civil but heated town hall meeting, repeatedly brought up Foxconn, right? Like it's fresh on people's minds. This is not the first time that somebody has come to town kind of in this in this kind of Music Man situation, saying like, look, it's going to be small, it won't make a big noise, it'll create lots of jobs, and we're all going to be doing great. Like they've heard this story before, they know how it ends. And ironically, in the case of Foxconn, as the thing that's on the Foxconn site now is a Microsoft data center.
Yeah. Music Man is a good reference there. I like that. All right, we have only a little bit of time left, so I want to just talk about a different story, because this was great, and the story is fabulous, and I just urge everybody to go find it on the Mother Jones website. What's the title again of the story?
How the American oligarchy went hyperscale.
Yes, that's right, and it's fabulous. So please, everybody, do yourself a favor. It's a great story. All right, you've written others, and I want to just talk to you about one of them, because we are at the end. I mean, Wisconsin is still to come, but we are basically at the end of primary season, and I am in awe of what the Democrats did this primary season, in part because of something that you reported on, which is that for the first time in memory, they're running candidates like in, school districts in deep red parts of deep red states. And I mean, you got candidates running for dog catcher, you got candidates running for library boards, you got candidates running in legislative seats that probably they won't win, but at least they'll be there raising the flag and saying, don't believe the stuff the other guy's saying. They fielded an enormous number of candidates for a change. Talk about that.
Yeah, it's been really striking. I mean, if you pay a lot of attention to down ballot races, and everybody should actually be paying a lot of attention to down ballot races, you know that every year in any kind of state, there's going to be a lot of races that are just completely uncontested. And in fact, some of these races might literally go uncontested for decades. And this year is different. It's different not just compared to the last few years, but this is more candidates running for down ballot races as Democrats than we have seen in decades in a lot of states, and in some cases ever, at least as far back as you can easily find. Kansas, to give you one example, I talk, you have House candidates for the state House of Representatives running in races that literally have not been contested since 2006. You have to go all the way back to 1990 to find this many Democrats running for office in Kansas. And in fact, that was actually the last year Democrats, had a majority in the Kansas legislature. So, right. Talk about ancient history. In Texas, they have Democrats running for every single state House seat for the first time since the modern Democratic Party existed, for the first time since it stopped being like a one-party state. They've got candidates in every state legislative race in South Carolina. They've got them in every race in Arizona, and all but 2 seats in North Carolina. They have, and some of this is a deliberate, targeted effort by local parties, by county parties, by state parties to just make sure, we've got as many, people running as we can. And some of it is just a reflection of how fired up and angry people are in these areas, how fed up they are with showing up every 2 years and seeing this ballot line empty. They just, somebody in Kansas told me, like, I don't know how much I can campaign, but I just didn't want to pull up that ballot again and not see anybody there. And so I think this speaks to a real potential enthusiasm edge that Democrats will have, and also a potential to kind of pick up a few stray seats here and there if the right breaks come. Well,
and in 2010, the Republicans did this, and the country has never been the same. So it's important to do. It's very hard to do. It's very hard to do this nationally. There are, I think, 10,000 elections. Oh, there are 10,000, a little bit more than 10,000 elected offices in America. I mean, it's not, we don't know that. You vote for a few people, but there are a lot of elected offices, and with the partisan divide that we have matching our geography in some ways, and then with the gerrymandering assuring that, it's hard to want to raise your hand and run all over the place. But this time people did, and it means that 2 sides of a story are going to get told to people as opposed to just one all over the country. And that is an amazing thing for us and very healthy for our democracy.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's a lot of signatures to have to gather. It's a lot of work that goes into just getting your name on the ballot in a lot of these states. But it also means, that whoever's running for statewide office in Kansas will have a for sure dedicated organizer on the ground in whatever tiny red rural county that you're talking about. Yep. So I think there are not exclusively, but there are upstream benefits to having everybody on board downstream.
Yeah, there are. Coattails run both ways in politics, for sure. All right, well, thank you for your time and for your reporting. And listen, everybody, Mother Jones is a national treasure. The reporting is solid. The facts are checked. The stories are terrific. And so, I love talking to reporters, and Tim, your work is great. I really am in awe of it. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Welcome back to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
Okay, I have a treat for you guys. I'm not comparing myself to George Washington, but what I loved about George Washington is that he was always willing to be, have a cabinet of people who are smarter than he is, who know more about their stuff than he did, and he did a good job. Anyway, Pat Creedlow knows more about broadcast and radio than I ever will, and we're going to talk about Wisconsin, something he knows more about than I ever will. He's the founding editor of Up North News. He's been a radio and TV broadcaster in Wisconsin, and for a time a state legislator. So I'm thrilled that you're here joining us.
Well, it's wonderful to be here. It's been great to appear on Joan's show frequently. Yep. It's great to kind of spread the wealth here for people who go, why is this Pat Creidlow getting all over the place? Because y'all are nice enough to want to know what's happening north of the border here, where we have such an interesting governor's race. So I'm happy to fill in whatever blanks I can.
Well, good, because primary season is nearly over, but you guys are outliers still to come. So let's talk about the governor's race. We'll start with that because you got a wild one.
Yes, we do. We started out with a field of 7 Democratic candidates, and then we had candidates drop out. We had one candidate come back in, and we have one person who has been a consistent front runner, Francesca Hong, a state representative, who describes herself as a Democratic socialist. And she has consistently led. A lot of people thought that as more people started tuning into the race, as more undecideds decided, that would level out the field, and it has not. As late as Friday late morning, new polling indicated that Francesca Hong still has a 2-to-1 advantage over Milwaukee County Executive David Crowley, and then 2 other active Democrats in the field. Now, of course, we're all chastened by what happened in Michigan with what the polling said versus what the results were. So I don't know that we really expect Representative Hong to have a 2-to-1 advantage over David Crowley when the votes come in. Will it get to the Michigan level of 1% or a little more than that? Yeah. It certainly is possible, but the race right now certainly looks like Francesca Hong's to lose.
Yeah, I mean, primary. Just so for people who are paying attention to this stuff, polling in primaries is terrible and has always been terrible because primary voting is such a strange thing and you don't really know who's going to show up or who's motivated to do it. So the margin of error on primary poll, well, not so margin of error, they're off by like
the uncertainty
18% all the time, but not by 50%.
No, but certainly there's a reason why you have the other candidates, State Senator Kelda Roys and former Cabinet Secretary Joel Brennan, staying in the race, even though they have, oftentimes single-digit support. This is not just a potential for a polling error. This is a race that has been a minefield for the candidates. We had David Crowley get out of the race and endorse Lieutenant Governor Sarah Rodriguez. Sarah Rodriguez's campaign then imploded because her campaign manager made incredible financial errors. David Crowley got back in the race. Governor Tony Evers, who'd been quiet through the whole year-long affair, suddenly popped up and endorsed David Crowley getting back into the race. But there have been questions about, a website that he'd worked on in the past. Mandela Barnes got out of the race. There's been talk about his behavior in the past. So if you're somebody like Senator Kelda Roys, who's trailing in third place, you look at the current controversies, you look at past controversies about Francesca Hong's, past statements, and you go, why would I get out of the race? Anything can still happen with just a couple of days left.
Well, and anything happens with more frequency than it should in your state.
That's right. See Maine.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about the front runner.
Sure. Well, Francesca Hong is in her 3rd term in the state assembly. She represents the Madison area, right around the state capitol. And from the beginning, she's a former restaurant owner, bartender. She's a chef, and she has no filter. And people love her for that. From the very beginning, they saw somebody who was willing to be a little bawdy, who was happy to be profane in talking, not just gratuitously, but in talking about the angst and the anger that people have about, the current system. So from the beginning, she's been seen as an anti-establishment kind of Democrat, one who's not going to just, sit and wait for her turn. That said, I think it was still a surprise to people, A, that she jumped into the race for governor, and B, that she became the front runner. I think she wanted to get the word out about the, unsatisfactory feelings of the electorate out there. But she did more than that. She clearly tapped into something. And for people saying that this lead is artificial and the state's never going to go for a Democratic socialist, I would say that after this many months and these many polls, her advantage isn't happening by accident.
Yeah.
She is tapping into something, and whether she was doing it to get attention and then maybe eventually run for a congressional seat or something else, or if she was always, guns a-blazing, going to try to get the nomination for governor, she's tapped into something that has worked, it has resonated, and it has, so-called establishment Dems. I mean, they're on the ledge right now. They're calling me. My phone's been ringing and they're upset, and I'm trying to talk them off the ledge and let them know, if she's the nominee with this kind of an advantage in the polling, you're going to be okay. But
Yeah.
right
I
now,
mean,
a lot of Democrats don't feel okay.
I've watched some. I mean, I haven't seen her personally campaign, but I've watched her online. She has she's very compelling. She's very inviting. I can understand why, as a candidate, particularly in this moment, her persona is very attractive. I'm a chef. I like to bring people to the table. I mean, it's, I think she's very likable.
There's nothing career politician about her yet. And it is a most unfortunate knock on somebody like Senator Kelda Roys, who has spent a quarter century in public service. She serves in the state Senate. I served in the state Senate. I have followed her career forever. And she has a very solid record. She is extremely well spoken, very comfortable on the stump. But this year, whether it's, overall dissatisfaction with the Trump presidency, anger about it, or dissatisfaction by moderates and independents about the entire system, they're just looking at, somebody who is, established and saying, well, that's nice, but I need to go with somebody who's going to be brash and bold and maybe not get everything that she wants, but she is speaking on my behalf is probably the best way I can explain her current advantage.
And there isn't any sense that, or I should ask you if there's any sense, in Maine, they had a candidate who people said the same things about. And it turned out, we had to kick him off the ballot after the primary. And the maniacs, the Mainers, did a fabulous job of figuring out how to get past that. But there's no sense that she's a deeply flawed candidate, that she can't do the job, right? There's just a sense that people are worried that her politics may make it harder for her to win in the general.
Yeah, there's people that look and say, well, I mean, she is, tilting at windmills, and she won't be able to do the things that she wants to get done. And my response to that is, I think most voters know that. I think they know that, no one person gets everything, but at least look like you're giving a damn and fighting for us. And I often invoke, and I'll do it again, another Democratic socialist in the Wisconsin legislature, Representative Christian Phelps from Eau Claire. I was asking him some time back to explain the appeal of the Democratic socialist label. And I've always loved his explanation, and it goes like this. I don't have a problem with anybody calling themselves a moderate voter. Every voter is very able to say they feel like they're in the middle of things. But when I hear moderate politician, that's a red flag for me. That tells me they're going to settle just for the sake of compromise, far short of what they should. And what Democratic socialists are doing is saying, no, we're not moving the goalposts in just to accommodate, just to get along. We've got these goalposts out where they are, and we're going to fight harder. We're still willing to negotiate. We're still willing to compromise, but from goalposts that are out here rather than close to the 50-yard line. And that is the kind of spirit that has enabled somebody like Representative Hong to get the traction that she has.
In fairness, I mean, does she buy all of the things in that DSA document that came out that said, we should not have an elected president and all of that stuff? I mean, most of the DSA people that I know are like just saying, look, we want to be Democrats, but we want to tell people we're not those Democrats. We aren't the let's make a deal Democrats. We've learned from the Republicans. We have things that we care about, and we are going to the mat fighting for them.
Right. And there are some Democratic socialists for whom the answer is no, they don't subscribe to everything that's part of DSA.
Yeah.
But Francesca, near as I know, is or has been a paid member of DSA. And so she has rightly been getting quizzed on all of it. And
Yeah.
she has either evolved or nuanced her answers to make clear that she would not, as governor, try to abolish prisons or abolish police or abolish the U.S. Senate. But that does not take away from her feeling that these institutions need to be reformed, that they are not doing the job as well as taxpayers should expect, as well as citizens should expect who believe in human rights and things like that. So she does have a needle of thread, especially when you consider that her opponent, Republican Congressman Tom Tiffany, and the entire Republican/billionaire class is going to be they're going to move heaven and earth to make people believe that she is going to shut down all police and shut down all prisons and raise the Soviet flag above the Capitol on day one. I mean, what that group did against Mandela Barnes, 4 years ago when he was running for U.S. Senate, is going to look like a cakewalk compared to what they're going to do to Francesca Hong this time around. The only question is, will she be able to pivot and stay tapped into that voter anger about the current system? Or do we get on the same shiny object diversions about Thanksgiving tweets in the same way that John Kerry was swift voted back in 2004?
Yeah, was she a talented politician? And you see, I mean, I know
Yes.
she's the anti-politician, but is
Right.
she a talented one?
She
when
is. She's clearly in these small groups. She
Yeah.
thrives. I've seen her in those. I've seen her floor speeches, and she
Mhm.
thrives. Where she is weakest currently, and I think she would acknowledge this as well, is getting pressed in these debates and network TV interviews.
Mhm.
And I feel like, well, if that's your weakest link right now, you can work on that. You can be coached.
Yeah.
But in terms of when you're talking to voters about what they want to see in
Mhm.
terms of solutions to get money out of politics and fix healthcare and make it so I can afford childcare and things like that, I mean, she's already there.
Yeah. All right. So Wisconsin has, because you've had to have because of what's gone on in that state and massive Supreme Court races that mattered, you have a Democratic primary voter that pays attention. You have voters who are used to paying attention at a sort of higher level than, say, here in Illinois. So when they make this decision, it it's likely an informed decision. They will have had a chance that she'll have been at the tires kicked. And I don't know, around the country, I'm sort of in awe of what Democrats have done mostly in this primary season.
Oh, they are motivated like never before because for the first time in 16 years, Democrats may control either the state assembly and or the state senate and be able to defend the governor's office to get the
Mhm.
so-called trifecta, which they last had back in before the 2010 election, back when I was serving in the state senate. And of course, in 2010, we saw Scott Walker come into the governor's office. The legislature's been under Republican control ever since. And there's just so many things that have gone wrong in this state since that Walker era that Democrats feel like after a couple of successful Supreme Court elections, getting fair maps to replace the Republican rigged maps, that they're finally able to give Wisconsin the kind of government that they would vote for, rather than what you have in a gerrymandered case
Mhm.
where Republicans locked themselves into power and went against all kinds of issues that otherwise would have, 70, 80% support, things
Yeah.
like abortion rights and gun safety and investing in schools and things like that. So when you're that close to having what would truly again be a representative government in the state, you can
You
get
can make some
where,
progress.
yeah, Democrats they're taking nothing for granted. There's no
Yeah.
complacency
Yeah.
here. It's just that there appears to be a finish line in sight. And so here comes that shot of adrenaline to take them the rest of the way to November.
Well, so I mean, with that as background, then I am not um, so concerned that somehow Francesca Hong won't be able to win. You know, I mean, the tires have been kicked. People have some legitimate criticisms of her, as we do about every candidate on the planet. But if the Democrats in the state say this is our candidate, will Governor Evers and everybody else there come together as they have in Michigan, or will they put their heads in the sand? I don't think they're putting their heads in the sand.
I think there will be a strong sense of unity in the beginning, but I'm not going to be Pollyanna about this. If Francesca Hong has a serious misstep during the campaign,
Mm-hmm.
there will be people on the left who don't want her to be the nominee, who will say, "Oh, I told you so," and all hope is
Yes,
lost,
we
and
all do that. That's
they're
what
going to
we
go
do.
drowned in a pity pool filled with sour grapes, and that's their right to do that. But coming out of the gate, uh, the person that I invoke for this is our current Secretary of State, Sarah Godlewski, who is
Mm-hmm.
now going to be the nominee for lieutenant governor. She made a very interesting and wise choice not to join the crowded field of candidates for governor, but she's the only person on the primary ballot for lieutenant governor. So she's going to be the running mate. Here in Wisconsin, you don't run as a ticket. The voters choose your ticket. And so sometimes the governor nominee and the lieutenant governor nominee who win those primaries, they don't like each other. This time around, though, it's going to be Sarah Godlewski as the lieutenant governor running mate. She's going to get along with any of those folks that are currently in the race. She has broad appeal across the state. And so
Mm-hmm.
she and that running mate, whoever it is, are going to come out with a very solid, united message from the get-go about all the reasons why Tom Tiffany would be a terrible governor for Wisconsin. And then it's on Fran to basically avoid any miscues that could derail that unity train.
Yep. Okay. Well, that's always true when you get a nominee. Like, just don't screw it up.
That's right.
Don't screw it up. All right. Wait. Like, what other? There's not the only races you've got. Can I just say one thing? You mentioned Mandela Barnes and the race he had, and we're saying the Democrats can win the state, but he didn't win. And you guys gave us, and I've said this about a million times, people are tired of hearing it, the dumbest box of rocks in the United States Senate in Ron Johnson.
Yes, we did. But I always add this disclaimer. Ron Johnson did not win that race. Mandela Barnes was going to win that race, but his billionaire friends, especially the Elines and Diane Hendricks, that basically a group of billionaires dragged Ron Johnson's carcass across the finish line, running a series of wildly racist ads, but they worked just enough. And this was always the crux of Mandela Barnes's campaign this time around is, did he screw up? Should he have won? And then others will say, hey, wait a minute. No Republican incumbent U.S. Senator lost their election in 2022. He actually came the closest, and it was the closest U.S. Senate election in Wisconsin history. So there were a lot of people that said, hey, he's already got statewide appeal. Let's get him over the finish line. But even if he did stay in this race and win the nomination, he would face that same billionaire cabal that's going to come in against any of these folks. They're going to come after Francesca Hong for, her old tweets. They'd come after Kelda Royce for her abortion rights activism. They'd come after David Crowley because of the crime in Big Bad Milwaukee. They're ready for no matter who the Democratic nominee is. So they'd have been ready for Mandela Barnes just as easily.
Pat, do you think they're ready, but their message is old now? The country has heard this Republican message a bunch of cycles. It hasn't evolved. It's the same. We can't trust them. They don't look like us. We can't trust them. They're, crazy wacko communists. We can't trust them because they don't care about crime. Or I just think that we've watched Donald Trump now enough in every county, in every state in the country, and this is just boring.
It is for the most part. But there is always an audience for the kind of material that frankly belongs under a rock, and it will come out. And, much like they used it against a black man and much as they used it against women overall once upon a time, they'll now run against, this child of immigrants and say she's not one of us. And they'll, and of course the whole democratic socialist thing. So there will be an audience for it. And as a result, we're going to hear it over and over and over and over again. And it is going to have a backlash effect on some moderate and independent voters. They're going to go, seriously, is that all you guys got? So it really is. I frame it as fear versus frustration. So the Republicans are going to campaign on fear. Francesca Hong is going to campaign on frustration. And I frankly, in this year, in this environment, I think frustration is going to trump fear, pun intended, and that in the end, people are going to say, as they were almost ready to say with Mandela 4 years ago, okay, not the kind of candidate we're used to seeing up here in the white bread Midwest, but let's go do it.
Let's go do it. Yeah, I think it's I think again, if you look across the whole country, I think Democrats have picked candidates who are, Marie Gluesenkamp Perez and Al Said. They all fit in the ambit of a left of center party, but just barely. It's pretty broad, and you'll find candidates you don't agree with, and you'll find candidates you do agree with, but that's what a democracy is. And then you work out the differences. On the other side, they all take their marching orders directly from the top. And that is a very different feeling. So they don't disagree. They got their notes from the, campaign committee about what they're supposed to try and sell during the summer. Good luck selling that.
And and look, Wisconsin voters will tell you about how readily they accepted Barack Obama when he was running.
Yeah.
They still talk about when nobody thought a lesbian from Madison could win a U.S. Senate race.
Right.
Tammy Baldwin did, and Tammy Baldwin
has been a great senator.
Has proven to be an amazing senator who constantly gets a huge share of Republican votes because they know she is a Democrat. She is a liberal, but she's also great at constituent services. Yep. She listens. She has a Wisconsin first agenda. And so there is nothing here that says, oh, we're only going to elect, people that look and sound like Tony Evers and Tom Tiffany. It's not like that.
Well, and people remember Scott Walker. You had a somewhere in Wisconsin, there was recently a big public meeting about a data center. And people said, hey, wait a minute, before you build one of these giant data centers, do you remember Foxconn?
Right.
These are fresh wounds still.
And these are people, Foxconn, we haven't even really talked about that much in this campaign, but with AI data centers, Fran did do an ad or a video recently standing in the Foxconn site and talking about, again, how you had in Scott Walker and the entire Republican legislature, because they held votes on this, they were willing to give away the story. They were willing to give away billions to an out of, for a foreign corporation with a bad track record. And so there's no shortage of things that Francesca can tap into. It's just that AI data centers and her call for a moratorium really got her attention right out of the gate. And people say, well, if she's ahead of the trend on that issue, in what other ways can she be the kind of leader that is really going to lead, and rather than just do whatever her political party wants her to do?
Yeah, it's time for hard, tougher leadership. I think we're hungering for that. All right, well, what other races are on the ballot that are interesting?
Well, there are, of course, a couple of statewide offices. Attorney General Josh Kaul, a Democrat, will be facing the same opponent as he did 4 years ago, Eric Toney, who's the district attorney in Fond du Lac County. That one will be very much framed as, do you want somebody who's going to stand up to Trump, or do you want a rubber stamp for Trump? Because Josh Kaul has been part of dozens and dozens of lawsuits trying to prevent federal overreach by the Trump administration. Eric Toney has shown every indication that he would simply be another Trump acolyte in the attorney general's office. So that would be the other big state race. Then you have up here in Wisconsin, we have 8 congressional districts, and the one that is going to get the most attention is the 3rd Congressional District, starting in the southwest corner of Wisconsin, but then going up the western edge and then going up into parts of central Wisconsin.
Mhm.
And that is the one where Derek Van Orden, the incumbent Republican, is going for a 3rd term. Usually, when you put Derek Van Orden, you usually put like R dash Prairie du Chien. It's actually R dash, Grouchville. The man just lives he lives on Twitter
Yeah.
and just wants to insult and run AI slop and yell at anybody. And it could be that the shtick is finally getting old. But first, we need to see who comes out of that primary. There are
Mhm.
2 women, both from Eau Claire and Western Wisconsin, Rebecca Cook and Emily Berge, who are vying in Tuesday's primary. Either one will have a very decent shot because the 3rd Congressional District is actually one of the few truly purple districts left in the country.
Mhm.
And so because control of the House will be in play, you will have all kinds of outside groups coming into the 3rd Congressional District
No question. Something
trying
that
to
Wisconsin is used to.
something we are very used to in the 3rd CD. There are a couple that I just quickly mention in the 1st Congressional District in southern southeast Wisconsin, Republican Brian Stile. Everybody says it should be a purple district. It hasn't been to this point, but obviously that doesn't mean Democrats won't try. And then finally, here up north in the 7th Congressional District, Tom Tiffany is the congressman. He's running for governor, obviously. So you have 3 Democrats running and 4 Republicans running for that open seat. And it's only noteworthy because one of the 4 Republicans is a 26-year-old kid with no job record, and has no history of activism within the party or anything like that. But oh, by the way, he's the son-in-law to Sean Duffy, the former
Oh,
congressman and now U.S.
right.
Secretary of
Yeah.
Transportation.
Yeah.
Sean Duffy has been, helping steer, not steer, wink, wink, transportation funds because he's Secretary of Transportation, all kinds of lobbyist money going his way, the Trump endorsement, and all of this to try to prop up somebody who just makes it look like another Trump case of an aristocracy wannabe. And I am just curious as hell to see what Republican voters do up here. It is solid Trump territory, but will they look at this 26-year-old and go, no, even we still have our standards? Or if they go, hey, if this is what the big guy wants, then we'll take this guy.
Yeah. But I mean, you said solid Trump territory, and I believe it locally, but the polling in Wisconsin on Trump, even though he won the state, is he's now underwater, as he is everywhere else. And I think polling on the MAGA movement has them underwater too there, don't they?
They do, but having been the 7th district candidate back in 2012 and represented part of that area in the legislature, worked it for decades as a reporter. It is an area much like a big chunk of rural America that was once solidly Democratic. Things changed over time, and it is emblematic of red rural districts,
Mhm.
throughout the country.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean that the Democrats don't stand a chance in here, but it would have to come in a wave. And this would have to be a wave of immense dissatisfaction with Trump and just the way things are going for this district to flip. So it would still be a tall order.
Should be a tall order. All right, one more question about sort of rural campaigning. The Trump administration has not been particularly good for rural America, but that's been a hard message for Democrats to get out. Um, I, Francesca Hong's from Madison. Is she able to talk to rural voters about their issues? And are other candidates out there talking about, everything from hospital closures to embargoes on selling your grain or the jacked up prices of fertilizer that we see all over in
Well,
rural America?
that's exactly what I was going to tell you is that in these rural districts, I mean, they send their kids to school and they've seen what Republicans have done to jack up their property taxes, over the
Mhm.
years. They have watched hospitals and clinics close. My wife is an OBGYN in Rice Lake, which is midway between Eau Claire and Duluth Superior. And they closed their labor and delivery a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So if you're in that northwest corner of Wisconsin, you're now looking at an up to 2-hour drive to deliver a baby. And that is not sitting well with people. There are just some fields of medicine that you can't just say, oh, telehealth will take that over.
Right.
No, the robot's not delivering a baby in rural Wisconsin. So people are acutely aware of the failings of this president, who came here to Chippewa County not that long ago and tried to talk up his accomplishments, but nothing about it. There was no substance to it. And people obviously see what the tariffs have done. They've seen a farm bill that's been stalled for years. They've seen an attempt at doing farm bailouts, but they know that that just adds to the federal deficit. So they then have to try to win over these areas with some of the more despicable tactics that, prey on people's biases and prejudices. And, that still sits well with a certain segment of the population. But again, this could be the year that rural voters look at, the lack of high-speed internet,
and say,
the potholes on the roads, and go, why don't we maybe try a new direction this time?
Well, we've run out of time, so that's got to be the last word. All right, everybody, pay attention to Wisconsin. It's always been important for America in every kind of way. And if you want to know what's going on there, pay attention to Pat Kreitlow.
Absolutely. Come follow me at upnorthnewswi.com.
Thank you, Pat.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Welcome back to Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid on WCPT 820.
Well, it's not Edwin, it's Paul Chivari, rounding out the show for you here for the last few minutes of Edwin Eisendrath's It's the Democracy, Stupid. What did you think about the episode this week with Ahmad Baba, Rachel Cohen, Tim Murphy, Pat Kreitlow, all the guests on this week? I want to hear your thoughts. 773-763-9278. That's 773-763-WCPT. Tell me what you thought about what you heard on the show today, maybe some of the other stuff that's on your mind today. Sad to hear that Joe Biden's prostate cancer is getting worse, according to his son, Hunter Biden. Of course, Todd Blanche getting named by the Senate to be the Attorney General. Give me your thoughts on some of these stories and more. Want to kick things off here. We got Jim from Chicago on the line. Jim, thank you for calling the show today.
Hi, Paul. All I can say is the 81 million people who voted for Joe Biden in 2020, I don't care what the philosophy in their mind was when they went into the voting. We won the election. That's all. That just made me happy. I have no idea individually what people think. You'd have to be a swami, a mind reader, to figure that out. The other thing is Blanche. The only Blanche, when I hear the word Blanche, I think of Streetcar Named Desire and Marlon Brando screaming that out. And Streetcar Named Desire by Tennessee Williams. That's
I don't think this Blanche accepts the kindness of strangers.
No, I don't either. But think about what a disaster this guy will be, Paul. First of all, he's I don't know how to describe him. I mean, he's indescribable, really. The survivors of the Epstein, the poor kids, he gave them no deference at all. He didn't pay any attention to where they said. He's hiding those 3 million volumes, and I'm sure that Trump is all over him. It's just an absolute disgrace. But in my mind, I don't care how we do it. We got to get rid of Mike Johnson. I'm sick of looking at Mike Johnson. So we've got till November 3rd. Then he can make different plans and go maybe move to Florida with the rest of the Republicans.
Are you saying to round out the rest of this Congress, you'd like to see a different Speaker of the House, or are you talking about the excitement of maybe we can flip it?
I don't want to see Mike Johnson again. That's for certain.
Because I was worried that it was like a different Republican to end this Congress, and I think that Mike Johnson might be the safest bet we got with a Republican.
Well, no, he is until January of next year.
You got it.
But anyway, Paulie, good to hear your voice, and you take care of yourself, buddy. Thank you.
Good to hear you too, Jim. Thanks for calling, as always. Let's go to Nancy calling in. I see it says Nancy is scared. I know Nancy. If this is Nancy from Oakland, you're always kind of the pessimist, maybe to put it, or a realist, but keeping us grounded, I think, is the best way to put it. But what are you scared about, Nancy?
Well, that's what, I call myself a realist.
I think it's better than a pessimist, because I feel like when someone's called a pessimist, they're a downer, and I don't think you're being a downer. I think you're trying to keep us focused.
I'll take pride in the name Negative Nancy, but, somebody's got to speak up, because everybody's thinking, oh, good, we're going to, and believe me, I was so happy that all the progressives won and everything. That's great. My problem is, they haven't been, first of all, the Democrats are not a unified party. They never have been.
No.
Secondly, they've been following an undemocratic system of government from day one. We have never been a democracy, but that's my own opinion. And third, November's too late. You know, everybody keeps saying, "Oh, wait till November." We are not. They're doing their damnedest to not have elections in November. Trust me, I do not trust these guys. They are way too overconfident. I said this in the last two elections, and guess what happened? They won. And don't tell me that these elections have been free and fair. Ever since 2000, I could go back further, but we won't. Ever since 2000, when the not-so-Supreme Court selected the president rather than us electing him, we've been screwed. And these damn, you know, the moderate Democrats are causing us all kind of trouble because they still don't know how to fight. I'm hoping to God that the progressives, finally, people are going to, you know, see that they're the ones with the answers. Because as one of the guests said today, we'll go back to what Democrats used to be, which is they're not extreme and, you know, they let the cons, you know, control the narrative all the time. These progressives are progressives. They want to move forward just like the majority of us do. And stop blaming the voters. We, the people, have known a lot of this forever. It's the politicians who can't seem to wake up, don't know how to fight, and they let the minority control everything all the time. And, you know, I hope to God I'm wrong. You don't know how badly I want to be wrong.
No,
But
I think you raised some really good concern.
I'm not scared. I'm terrified. I'm terrified because this scumbag is going to have some way to screw everything up. He is. And, you know, I'm not so sure. There's too many red states that are going to allow ICE to come in there and block, you know, the voting, the polls and stuff. And I'm terrified.
I think you have a good reason to be concerned about it, Nancy, and thanks for the call. I mean, I think, you know, you're already seeing the infighting of the Democratic Party, how even you're seeing centrist or, you know, party line Democrats already critiquing Democratic socialists that seem to be doing well in their primaries, that seem to be making waves, like Mayor Zoran Mandamny in New York. And I think the infighting of the party is, you know, the party eats itself sometimes with the Democrats. And really what the fight is right now is we need a fair democracy. And I think we see with what the Republicans have been doing, the gerrymandering that they've done in Texas, you know, and how, you know, the gerrymandering fight, no matter how bipartisan it is, how you see both sides do it, the fact that you're seeing in this midterm election cycle what's been going on, it's clear as day that the Republicans are doing whatever they can to try and stifle this upcoming midterm elections because they see the writing on the wall that making the House consistently red is probably going to be difficult. Making the Senate consistently red might be a little bit easier for them, but still, anything could flip back to blue. And of course, Donald Trump doesn't need, for his sake, to have any sort of chamber be blue because then that's going to put a stop to the steamroller that we've seen with this party in this administration so far in the first 2 years. Let's go to Paul in Seattle, who I'm sure Paul's got a lot of thoughts about some of the stuff we've been talking about. How you doing today, Paul?
Hey, Paul. Well, I was interested in the first conversation that Edwin had with, I don't remember who it was, but they were talking about
Ahmed Baba back in the first hour.
Talking about Dr. El Sayed and how blacks in Detroit or the black community may not be, you know, are they going to turn out? And I just heard about this yesterday. I was texting a friend back in Michigan, and I said, you know, he's going to just kick some butt. And she said, she said, well, I just hope the blacks turn out because if they don't, we're screwed. And I said, why wouldn't they? And I didn't know about that they were supporting Haley Stevens. Actually, I just emailed Eric Grant and Richard about this question. Okay, I understand that they wanted to kind of play it safe, and they didn't, you know, is El Sayed electable and all this stuff, and that might be a legitimate reason in the primary. But the number one reason to support him is he just beat Haley Stevens. ignorant, okay? He just won. I mean, come on. Yeah. Let's not lose focus. That's like saying that, somebody who just won the conference championship doesn't deserve to go to the Super Bowl. It's like, I'm sorry that you didn't think they were going to go at the beginning of the season, but they're here, right?
Yep.
Don't underestimate them. They're here. Mike Rogers, by the way, is a very weak candidate. He was he retired from Congress. He was a representative in the 8th District back in Livingston County, where actually I lived with my mom for 5 years, from 2019 to 24 until she died. He did nothing, and Alyssa Slotkin won that seat. He lost to Alyssa Slotkin last time in 24. He doesn't. I think you were the one who's saying somebody said that he'd rather campaign from the beach in Florida. He lives in Florida. I know David Hoffman State said he lives in Florida and said he'd rather stay down. I think the Democrats need to buy him one of those, those giant 10,000-piece jigsaw puzzles to give him something to do, because all he wants to do is run for, Congress and get a cushy job. And he seems to be the only one that the Republicans have. But number one, he just won. So let's give him credit there. And I don't know why the black community wouldn't turn out for him now, given he's just shown that he's got the stuff. And Mike Rogers is a very weak candidate and doesn't speak to their, the concerns of the working poor in the black community at all. And Al-Said is doing that. And by the way, back in Livingston County, Michigan, where Mike Rogers was the representative, it's a county of 210,000 white people. There are 1,200 black people living in Livingston County. That's less than 1% He has never done anything for black people. Mike Rogers has never done anything. The other thing, the big argument about socialism is this. I ran across a quote, I'll just do real quick, by Winston Churchill, which I thought I'd argue with this. And this is what he said. Winston Churchill said, the inherent vice of capitalism is the unequal sharing of blessings. The inherent virtue of socialism is the equal sharing of miseries. And I thought, well, I'm sorry, Mr. Churchill, but you left some things out. The inherent vice of capitalism is not only the unequal sharing of blessings, it's also the unequal sharing of miseries. And the people with the blessings don't seem to share any of the miseries. They only have blessings. And he also left out in socialism, yes, the inherent sharing of miseries, equal sharing of miseries, but also the equal sharing of blessings. And I know that the Republicans always say, well, government shouldn't be picking winners and losers, yet that's exactly what the billionaire corporate Republican Party does, is pick billionaires to be winners who all they do is run up the score. And the other thing is, you notice that there a conservative meme, Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, was that a rising tide lifts all boats. Well, that sounds kind of socialist, right? Because really a rising tide lifts all boats equally. Yeah. The tide goes up 4 feet, all boats go up 4 feet, not just the rich ones. Everybody gets it. So they kind of want to borrow a socialist meme. I think people are catching on to the idea that, look, government shouldn't be picking winners and losers, because really as a nation, we shouldn't be having winners and losers anyway. Yep. We should all be together. And one more thing, if socialism is a sharing of miseries, well, that's what we should have. We shouldn't have some people who don't suffer the miseries of policies that don't work. We expect our government to represent us equally. That's what I think that means.
I agree with you, Paul, and thank you for the call. I mean, I always thought it was the responsibility of the government to take care of its people, but I think an argument could be made in this day and age that this is the first example. This is the modern example of you don't really need to educate your public. You don't really need to make sure that your public is healthy and that they're, the well-being. They just need to take care of the limited few that they need to take care of, and I think we're seeing it in the policies of this Republican Party and Donald Trump of they're taking care of their own, not even the entire party. They're rich, they're 1%. But thank you for the call, Paul. I want to get one more call in today. Cynthia from Denver, you wanted to talk about Todd Blanche getting the Attorney General appointment. Go ahead, Cynthia.
Yeah, I just wanted to say how scummy that makes me feel as a citizen. I just really resent this criminal cabal and shoving it down my throat. It has triggered all kind of feelings in me: anger, disappointment, sadness, and I can't wait to vote. And I think our Democrats are doing the best they can, and I think they've got great candidates, and I think that there's going to be a new revolution of fight back, because these candidates are very opinionated. They're not afraid to speak up, and I think that's going to be our new crop. So I hope that they are successful in many more ways, and if everybody just votes, I'm sure we will be.
Thank you for your call, Cynthia. Before I let you go, why is it that Todd Blanche was the one that kind of made you feel this way and not maybe some of the previous stuff? Because let's not forget that Matt Gaetz might have been sitting in the chair had he not been ousted out before Trump got reelected or before he officially got inaugurated.
Right. It's the totality, day after day being shoved down my throat, the criminal stuff that Trump is doing, the rules he's disregarding, the laws he's breaking. It's just, I feel like I'm being choked, force-fed all this madness. And it's no escape. And I think people are going to wake up and vote and speak their outrage because everybody's being affected with the gas prices, the groceries. It's like we're being squashed.
Yep, I agree. Thank you so much for the call, Cynthia. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. Yeah, I'm hoping that the world is catching up to this, and I think that's why you're seeing the way the Republican Party is handling this midterm election. Is they know that they're about to eat it really badly, and this is going to be. Their party's going to have to regroup. They're going to have to shed Trumpism. The hope is that the voters will determine that for them. But the thing that I'm concerned about is, they embraced Donald Trump from 2015 until whenever this ends, whether it's this year or next year or 2028. It's going to be the same thing like we saw with George W. Bush, though. Are a lot of people going to pretend like it never happened? I heard a lot of people in 2004 were really all about George W. Bush, and by 2009, they didn't even remember the guy's name anymore. So, we got to remember that. We got to remember that Trumpism happened and that people are going to dismiss it as quickly as they embraced it and that we can't let it go.